You're watching the Everything Network.
Bhupinder Bindi Singh Johal was an Indo-Canadian gangster from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. A self-confessed drug trafficker, he was known for his outspoken nature, blatant disregard for authority, and his long-time rivalry with former mentors Ranjit Chima and the rival Punjabi Mafia faction, led by the Dosanjh brothers and Rabi Kandola. Johal was born in 1971, although some sources have noted 1972 and 1973, in Punjab, India, to a Jat Sikh family of the Johal clan. His family immigrated to Vancouver, British Columbia with his parents at the age of 4. His parents separated, and he was raised by his mother. He was increasingly temperamental, resented discipline, and had a lack of respect and remorse for others. He suffered from severe depression when his parents cut his hair after an armed assault in Canada in the aftermath of the assassination of Indira Gandhi, which happened miles away in Delhi. His mother said, "That was the only time I saw another expression of his other than anger and silence." Bindi was considered to be a problem child by his teachers. One of his teachers, Rob Sandhu, stated, "When he came into the 8th grade, it didn't seem like he had any problems. It seems these kids are not being flagged. But teachers are raising these issues, so why aren't we acting on it?" Although he did well in school and was even on the honor roll, he was expelled from Sir Charles Tupper Secondary School and sentenced to 60 days in jail after he brutally assaulted his vice principal in 1989. He tried to justify his behavior at his trial in a defense that the journalist Jerry Langton wrote, smacked of cold-blooded cynicism, by saying that as an Indo-Canadian that he was the victim of a racist society, and he was only just lashing out against society by beating up his vice principal so severely that he had to go to the hospital emergency room to save his life. The judge at Johal's trial rejected this defense. The judge noted there was no evidence that the vice principal was a racist, and that whatever slights and insults he may have endured from others was no excuse for the assault. Having moved to Richmond, British Columbia, Johal enrolled in McNair Secondary School. He smashed in the window of a car using a baseball bat and was convicted of possession of a dangerous weapon. He enrolled in college but dropped out after his first semester and thus began his criminal career. He joined a once Hispanic gang called Los Diablos, the Devils. As the membership of Los Diablos became more Indo-Canadian, the gang was renamed as the Punjabi Mafia. He built a reputation as a hitman working for Jimmy and Ron Dosanjh, both of whom he would later betray and have kill. Johal also started to sell cocaine. On March 14, 1991, a Colombian drug trafficker, Teodoro Salcedo, was murdered in Vancouver. Jimmy Dosanjh was arrested and charged with the murder. While Dosanjh was in jail awaiting his trial, which ended with his acquittal, Johal took advantage of his absence to make himself leader of the gang. Bindi and his gang hijacked trucks carrying electronics and automobiles, landed at the port of Vancouver, which he sold on the black market. A television documentary at the time estimated that Bindi Johal had an annual income of $4 million. He reportedly had antisocial personality disorder, which may account for why he was so quick to kill those close to him. He didn't keep close friends and was extremely callous to his associates. According to Constable Spencer, all he was concerned about was himself. He was very narcissistic in nature and had a general hatred of people. Bindi actually met Bal, one of his close associates, in prison when he was in his 20s. They never knew each other growing up, and from Bal's statements, Johal made it very clear that they were not friends, but business partners as he did with everyone else in his group. He attended school with Harjit Sajjan, who later became the Canadian Minister of Defense. Bindi Johal was responsible for the murders of gangster brothers Ron Dosanjh and Jimmy Dosanjh. Jimmy Dosanjh was killed in February 1994, and Ron was killed in April. Johal knew that Jimmy Dosanjh had taken out a contract to kill him for over $230,000, according to Crown prosecutors. The hitman whom Jimmy Dosanjh hired to kill Johal instead approached him and made a deal for more money to kill Dosanjh. On February 25, 1994, Dosanjh went into a back alley to inspect some stolen electronics that his men had taken when he was ambushed and killed by his own men, whose true loyalty was to Johal. As a result, after killing Jimmy Dosanjh, Johal stated, "This Jimmy Dosanjh, they portrayed him as a hitman. Personally, from what I've seen of him on the street, I don't think he could have hid his way out of a paper bag." This was a direct insult directed to Jimmy and Ron Dosanjh, claiming that they had stopped being hitmen themselves and were rarely doing their own dirty work after climbing to the top of their criminal organization. In a television interview, Ron Dosanjh told a television crew that if he saw Johal at his house, he'd shoot him between the eyes. Johal, when asked to comment about the remark by another television crew, snapped back, "Basically, I just want these guys to know you got another thing coming if they think that." On April 19, 1994, Ron Dosanjh was killed in his red pickup truck while waiting for a traffic light when a car pulled alongside his truck and a man opened fire with an AK-47 assault rifle. Dosanjh took several bullets to his face, killing him instantly, and his truck veered wildly as his foot was no longer on the brake, crashing into a tree. On April 24, 1994, Johal's neighbor, Greg Olson, who was walking his dog, was killed in a case of mistaken identity. On April 25, 1994, Bindi Johal was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in connection with the Dosanjh murders alongside Sarbjit Gill, Rajinder Benji, Michael Kim Budai, Sun News Lai, Peter Gill, and Kim Phil Hosik, whom the Crown alleged to be the actual gunmen who killed the Dosanjh brothers. Because of the required security for the trial, it was one of the most expensive trials in Canadian history. His former brother-in-law, Peter Gill, was also accused. The accused, including Gill and Johal, were acquitted. During and following the trial, Gill had an affair with Gillian Guess, an active juror on the trial. Guess was sentenced to 18 months after being convicted of obstruction of justice. Gill was tried and convicted of the same crime and sentenced to 6 years in prison. The Crown appealed the acquittal of Johal and other defendants, but Johal was killed before the new trial began. Gill was not retried. The Punjabi Mafia is a criminal organization originating in British Columbia. The gang, initially being liberal in its membership, became more ethnocentric over time with the exception of some groups. The Punjabi Mafia is loosely affiliated and consists of several groups which sometimes work together. These groups are still active and notorious in Vancouver and have been since the early 1990s. They have been linked to the Independent Soldiers, Red Scorpions, Lotus Triads, Hells Angels, and the United Nations Gang in Canada, although several members of the Independent Soldiers can also be grouped as part of the Mafia as well. Bindi Johal was accepted into the Punjabi Mafia in the early 1990s, most likely through Ranjit Chima or Ron Dosanjh. Ranjit Chima and Ron Dosanjh were among the few who had full control of the criminal organization. According to Johal's former lieutenant, Buttar admitted to performing several executions alongside Bindi, as well as the unsuccessful attempt to kill Johal's associate and former brother-in-law, Peter Gill. However, Buttar was shocked when Bindi said he wanted his own cousin killed. "I thought this guy was kidding, but he was actually being serious about taking his cousin out." Buttar was suspected of being behind the hit on Robbie Candola outside his Cole Harbour penthouse. He believed Candola was the one responsible for his younger brother's death. He is also suspected to be the one behind Bindi's death. It is still up for debate whether he was killed because Bal feared Bindi would kill him or because Ranj and other major players turned on him. He was charged with aggravated assault for beating two men in a bar with a broken beer bottle in 1997. When imprisoned, Johal was labeled a menace to society. Bindi Johal was earning allegedly over $500,000 a week in his prime through various illegal activities, including murder for hire, drug dealing, and debt collecting. He was also affiliated with the Buttar brothers, who were well known across the lower mainland for their brutal gangland slayings. Johal coldly told Bal Buttar, "You listen to me. If you take care of things at your end, I'll be happy with you, brother. If you fuck me over, I'll kill you, all right?" Bindi Johal's chosen problem solver was a hit squad which he named the Elite, consisting of 5 Indo-Canadian hitmen. Buttar later stated that the Elite Hit Squad was responsible for 25 murders over a 5-year period. Bindi also had a legendary bad temper and was known for his frequent outbursts of violent rage, which led him to be convicted in 1997 of attacking 2 men in a bar fight with a broken beer bottle. He had convictions for obstruction of justice, possession of dangerous weapons, and aggravated assault. A Chinese-Canadian rival drug dealer, Randy Chan, was kidnapped on October 25, 1996. Reportedly, Chan had been kidnapped by Roman Mann, one of Johal's associates. Mann was angry with the quality of the cocaine that Chan had just sold him, which he stated was very diluted despite the premium price. Chan was held captive for 50 or 56 hours, part of which was spent in an automobile trunk. Johal phoned Chan's older brother, Raymond, to tell him that if he wanted to see his brother alive again, to give him 5 kilograms of cocaine in exchange for his brother's life. Johal negotiated Chan's release with his brother to be in exchange for $500,000 paid by the Lotus Triads to the Punjabi Mafia faction of Bindi Johal. Chan's brother was Raymond Chan, a gang member of the Chinese criminal organization called the Lotus. Johal made no effort to disguise the fact that he was a gangster and would threaten the lives of rivals in interviews with television crews. He became a folk hero in the lower mainland, being admired for his success as a gangster, and many of the young men who joined organized crime admitted that it was Johal's example that inspired them to turn to crime. One gangster who wished to remain anonymous told the academic Arthur J. Pass, "To many young people in the immigrant community who feel that Canadian society does not give them enough chance to succeed, joining gangsters is an exercise in building their self-esteem." Why do you think Bindi Johal was a hero to many young Indo-Canadians? His legend had spread wide in the past few years among Indians, not only here but also in Toronto and Montreal, New York and San Francisco. He stood up to his school principals, he beat up those who called him racial names, and he was making a lot of money even though he was in his mid-20s. He drove fancy cars, he had girls falling over him. His gang was responsible for several murders. The first one killed was Amarjit Singh Dale, who was shot dead while leaving the Marpole Oak Ridge Community Center on January 19, 1997, after watching a hockey game. Dale was an associate of the Dosanjh brothers, and Johal wanted to see all of the associates of the Dosanjh brothers killed, lest they try to avenge them. On October 21, 1997, the Elite killed Gurinder Singh Kun Kun as he was leaving his home. Kun Kun had attended high school alongside Johal and considered him a friend. Johal, in a moment of paranoia, was convinced that Kun Kun was involved in the Olsen murder, which led him to order Kun Kun's murder. On July 1, 1998, Johal had the Elite kill Venus News Mackenzie. The reason for Mackenzie's murder was eliminate a romantic rival for the affections of a woman who preferred Mackenzie over Johal. On September 19, 1998, a member of the gang, Derek Chand Shankar, insulted Johal, calling him an idiot and a baby, after Johal stated he was too tired to go to a nightclub. Later the same night, Johal showed up at the nightclub and asked where Shankar was. Buttar stated that he was drunk and sleeping in a truck in the parking lot. Despite knowing that Johal was planning to kill Shankar, Buttar drove the truck to the Queensborough Bridge in New Westminster. As Shankar was waking up from his stupor, Johal shot him. On November 29, 1998, Johal's associate, Roman Danny Mann, expressed the wish to leave the gang, leading to Johal to punch him out in fury. Later the same night, Mann's body was found in an empty industrial lot in Burnaby, with a single bullet through his head. When Buttar asked Johal about the murder, he stated, "Blame it on the Hells Angels." Johal then asked Buttar to hit the nightclub with him. On Sunday, December 20th, 1998, Johal was dancing at the Palladium nightclub in Vancouver when he was shot from behind at 4:30 a.m. He was rushed to Vancouver General Hospital, where he died 4 hours later. No witnesses were able to describe the assailant. 4 months before Johal's death, at least 3 of Johal's associates had also been killed, with each killing alleged to be connected to Bindi, according to the confessions of Bal Buttar. In 2004, before he died, Bal told a reporter that he ordered the assassination of Johal, fearing that if he didn't do it, Johal would have had him murdered. The kidnapping trial was set to commence within 2 months of his murder. Buttar would have served up to 10 years if he had been convicted. Buttar was never convicted in the murder of Johal due to his blind and quadriplegic state. Johal was identified as one of the individuals in the Punjabi Canadian community who sought criminal activity as a means of fast success and fast money, and a glamorized lifestyle, and to counter racial discrimination and abuse with counter-violence. To many young people in the immigrant community who feel that Canadian society does not give them enough chance to succeed, joining gangsters is an exercise in building their self-esteem. Why do you think Bindi Johal was a hero to many young Indo-Canadians? His legend had spread wide in the past few years among Indians, not only here, but also in Toronto and Montreal, New York, and San Francisco. He stood up to his school principals. He beat up those who called him racial names. And he was making a lot of money, even though he was in his mid-20s. He drove fancy cars. He had girls falling all over him. He was a gangster who asked for anonymity.
You're watching the Everything Network.
The Independent Soldiers, otherwise known as the IS Gang, is an organized crime group based in British Columbia, Canada, that is engaged in organized crime across the nation and in Canadian prisons. The Independent Soldiers are a gang that was said to have been formed by a group of Indo-Canadians from South Vancouver and Metro Vancouver municipalities. They had come together during the 1990s under the name Sunset Boys. The Sunset Boys were a group of mostly Indo-Canadians whose favorite meeting was the Sunset Community Center and Sunset Park. One of the founding members of the Sunset Boys, who later became the leader of the Independent Soldiers, was Randy Naker. The gang were initially petty criminals, but started to work for the Punjabi Mafia in the 1990s as street-level drug dealers. As the group chose to assert its independence after the murder of Bindi Johal in 1998, the name Independent Soldiers was chosen as a way to emphasize their independence from the Punjabi Mafia. Like most gangs in the Lower Mainland, the members of the Independent Soldiers came mostly from middle-class families, which was not the norm with the rest of Canada. The colors of the Independent Soldiers are red and black. Members of the gang wear red and black clothing in public, together the initials IS stamped on their jackets and baseball hats. Naker founded the Independent Soldier clothing brand in 2004. Naker, an Indo-Fijian immigrant, always insisted that the Independent Soldiers were just a clothing line he had started, and he had nothing to do with crime. The Canadian scholar Mark Totten wrote the Independent Soldiers gang were typical of the gangs in the Lower Mainland, which started out as an ethnocentric gang and became more diverse with the passage of time. Totten wrote the Independent Soldiers were mostly a single-generational gang, were not especially territorial, and did not have the elaborate rituals that other gangs had. Totten wrote the Independent Soldiers were a mid-level gang in the Lower Mainland, and together with the Red Scorpions and the United Nations gangs are one of the largest gangs in the Vancouver area. Totten noted the Independent Soldiers were an unstable gang with a fluid membership and frequent leadership changes. The gang is organized in cells and primarily sells cocaine. By the early 2000s, the favorite meeting place for the leaders of the Independent Soldiers were the Loft 6 nightclub in Gastown. The Independent Soldiers in the Loft 6 nightclub were involved in a shootout with the Hells Angels in August of 2003 on the dance floor, sparked by the presence of John Johnson, a man associated with the Hells Angels who had beaten up an Independent Soldier earlier that year. One witness recalled, "A fight broke out, and all of a sudden bullets started flying. We just ran. We were right in the line of fire. We couldn't see anybody. We didn't know who was shooting, and people began crawling over top of each other to get out of the way." When the shootout was over, 3 people had been killed and 8 were wounded. Johnson was killed alongside Mahmoud Al-Khalil of the Independent Soldiers and John Popovich, the DJ at the club, who was killed in the crossfire. Independent Soldier Gurpal Singh Paul Dosanjh, the first cousin to the Dosanjh brothers, was shot in the head but survived his wound, albeit with serious brain damage. Dosanjh was murdered in March 2004 while eating at the Gourmet Castle restaurant in Vancouver. After the Loft 6 incident, many of the original members of the gang ended leaving the gang as it was felt to be too dangerous. The new members who joined the gang were much willing to work for the Hells Angels, and the journalist Jerry Langton wrote, "The Independent Soldiers steadily became less and less independent. At the same time, the Independent Soldiers became more multi-ethnic with the influx of new members. The Independent Soldiers were reduced down to being a puppet gang for the Hells Angels. Randy Naker was one of the pro-Angel leaders of the Independent Soldiers and emerged as a major force within the gang by 2005. When a puppet gang for the Hells Angels in Prince George known as the Crew were broken up by police arrests, the Hells Angels had the Independent Soldiers establish a chapter in Prince George as the replacement puppet gang for the Crew. The Prince George chapter of the IS were made up of mostly white or First Nations people. The Independent Soldier chapter in Prince George came to dominate the drug trade in that city, alongside the Renegades, who were also Hells Angels flunkies, which led to a rivalry with the Game Tight Soldiers. The Game Tight Soldiers disbanded, with some joining the Renegades, with the rest moving to Winnipeg to join the Rock Machine. The first leader of the gang, Sukhvinder Singh Dosanjh, was killed in an automobile accident in 2005. By 2005, the IS were operating across British Columbia and Alberta. The IS was mainly made up of Punjabi Canadians, but over the years they became more multicultural and accepted other ethnicities in the lower ranks as the Independent Soldiers. In January 2005, Randy Naker, along with Harpreet Narwal, Roman Narwal, and Sarpreet Johal, had kidnapped and beat Harpreet Singh after he refused to pay extortion money to the Independent Soldiers. On December 7, 2006, Naker, together with Independent Soldier Barry Espadilla, were arrested attending a gang meeting at the Castle Fun Park in Abbotsford after a passerby noticed one of the men had a handgun on him. Also arrested at the Castle Fun Park meeting that evening were Jamie Bacon along with Anton Huytes Mersing, Justin Prince, Dennis Karbovanek, and Jeff Harvey of the Red Scorpions. The Castle Fun Park meeting was a part of a takeover of the Red Scorpions by the Hells Angels, with Bacon acting as their proxy. Langton wrote the Independent Soldiers were a gang that had once been all Indian Canadian, but had since become just another Hells Angel puppet club. Both Naker and Espadilla were representing the Angels at the Castle Fun Park meeting. On the 9th of August 2007, the Fortune Happiness restaurant in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Vancouver was the scene of a shooting. Two masked gunmen stormed into the Fortune Happiness and opened fire on a group eating at a table. 2 men were killed while 6 were wounded. The well-known gangster Hung Van Sonny Bui took 6 bullets in his chest, but survived his wounds. The attack is believed to have been the work of the independent soldiers. As the Hells Angels took control, the independent soldiers, 2 members, namely Michael Justin Lal and his brother Corey Jason Lal, both left the independent soldiers to found their own gang, the Lal Crew. The Lal Crew were wiped out in the Surrey 6 massacre of October 2007. On the 15th of April 2008, Joseph J. Money Krantz, the owner and manager of World Extreme Fighting Club, was arrested by the police. Found inside of his home were 4.5 ounces of cocaine, 2 ounces of heroin, 8.7 ounces of crack, a .380 handgun, a 9mm handgun plus clothing and paraphernalia bearing the logos of the independent soldiers and the Hells Angels. It was later confirmed that Krantz was a member of the independent soldiers and that his World Extreme Fighting Club was popular with the independent soldiers. On October 20, 2008, Krantz was locking the doors of his Extreme Fighting Club in Abbotsford at about 9 p.m. when he was shot dead. It is believed he was killed out of the fear that he might make a plea bargain with the Crown for a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against his suppliers. During the ensuing gang war for control of the drug trade in the Lower Mainland, the independent soldiers served as proxies for the Hells Angels. On August 6, 2008, a shooting took place on Upland Street in Prince George with a man known as WB due to a court order being seriously injured. Arrested and charged for the shooting were 3 independent soldiers, namely Jesse Bird, Eric West, and Fabian Charlie, while another 3 independent soldiers were arrested but not charged. The fact that the 3 who not charged were all white, while the 3 who were charged were all First Nations people, became the object of some dispute in the Prince George media. 2 of the witnesses to the shooting, Garrett McComb and his girlfriend Brittany Geese, were found murdered inside their house on October 7, 2008, being shot several times. In October of 2009, Justice Karen Walker dismissed the charges against West, Bird, and Charlie after WB refused to testify, while she found that the Crown's sole remaining witness to be unreliable. The leader of the independent soldiers, Parminder Singh Peter Adiwal, was shot several times and badly wounded in an attack by a member of the Red Scorpions gang in April 2009 that left him a paraplegic. In April 2009, Naker became the new leader of the independent soldiers. While in jail following his arrest at the Castle Fun Park meeting, he had a member of the United Nations gang beaten in his cell block. Following his conviction for the assault and kidnapping of Harpreet Happy Singh in 2005, Naker was sentenced to a prison term. Naker admitted while applying for parole that he was the man behind the independent soldiers' clothing brand, but he denied being a gangster, saying that his business had been ruined when independent soldiers' gangsters started wearing his branded clothing without his permission. Naker was able to make day parole, but the parole board did not accept his claim to be an innocent businessman who was only guilty of only making clothing popular with gangsters, denying him full parole. While Naker was living at a halfway house in Vancouver, as part of his day parole, 2 armed men burst into the house on September 29, 2009, and stated that they were looking for Naker, who just left accordingly to the sign-out book for a local convenience store. The clerk had mistaken Naker for Raj Sumal. The 2 gunmen raced over to the convenience store and shot Sumal dead out of the belief that he was Naker. Ken Yaretz was a drug dealer in Kamloops who during a police stop in August 2008 had been found inside of the car of James Russell, the president of the Kamloops chapter of the Independent Soldiers. Yaretz, together with his best friend Damian Marks, had just moved into a new basement apartment when both men went missing on April 17, 2009. In May 2009, the corpses of Marks and Yaretz were found buried on grounds of the house at Noof Lake owned by Roy Fraser. It was stated by locals that it was common knowledge that Fraser was a drug dealer whose remote house had a marijuana grow-opt owned by the Hells Angels. Fraser was charged with murder but fled while on bail. On December 14, 2013, Fraser was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder in regard to Yaretz's death and 1 count of second-degree murder in regard to Marks's death. Brittany Irving of Kelowna was a 24-year-old healthcare professional who was addicted to OxyContin. To pay for her addiction, she worked as a marijuana dealer for both the local chapters of the Independent Soldiers and the Hells Angels. On the 6th of April 2010, she went to meet an Independent Soldier drug dealer, Jolan Joey Verma, and vanished. Her corpse was discovered by the police on May 25, 2010. During the police investigation of Irving's murder, Verma rammed a gun into the belly of another man, Mike Roberts, and told him, "You have to take the fall for this Irving murder. If you don't, I have no choice but to kill you, your wife, your children, and your grandchildren. I'm sorry, that's just how we do business." Verma was charged with her murder. On October 17, 2013, Verma was convicted of Irving's murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison with no chance of parole. Verma broke down hysterically in tears as the guilty verdict was announced in the court. After Russell was arrested, the new president of the Independent Soldier Kamloops chapter was Jeffrey Oldford. Oldford had been convicted of theft in April 2010, while also facing charges of sexual assault late in December 2010 and another for trafficking in April of 2011. On August 5, 2011, a group of men armed with guns and baseball bats broke into the house of a small-time drug dealer, Steve Bodie. Steve was robbed and beaten bloody with the bones in his chest, hands, and fingers all being broken. He was dumped by a highway in the Rocky Mountains and finally had one of his hands run over by a truck. After he went to a farmhouse to report the attack, the police entered Steve's house and found 2 independent soldiers looking for drugs. The police charged Oldford together with Adam Colligan, Brett Haynes, Greg Brotzel, and David Byford of the Independent Soldiers. Ranjit Singh Cheema was born in 1968 to a Jat Sikh family of the Cheema clan in the small village of Cheema Kurd, Jalandhar district, Punjab, India. During his childhood, Cheema moved with his family to England and then to British Columbia, arriving at the latter location in October 1978 when he was 10 years old. According to Cheema, his father Malkit was abusive and suffered from alcoholism, and his family was poor. Cheema worked with his mother in Fraser Valley berry farms during summer break from the ages of 10 to 15, following which he worked as a janitor at night while attending high school. After graduating from high school in 1986, he went to college, studying criminal justice while working as a bouncer and then as a truck driver. He claimed that he wanted to become a police officer while in college. Ranjit Cheema pleaded guilty to a nightclub shooting where he intimidated some men over a woman named Monica Alvarez at a Southwest Marine Drive nightclub on November 19, 1993. As it was alleged by her that the men had bumped into her and caused trouble, which caused Ranjit to intervene on her behalf. Prior to this, he had no criminal record. In the May 1995 trial of Bhupinder Bindi Singh Johal, who was accused of murdering gangster brothers Jimshir, Jimmy Singh Dosanjh, and Ranjit Ran Singh Dosanjh, Cheema was identified as an associate of Johal and a major drug distributor involved in cocaine trafficking. In August 1995, Cheema was shot at the Zodiac Karaoke nightclub in Richmond, British Columbia. At the time of the shooting, he was with Manjinder Rabi Singh Kandola, a founder of the Independent Soldiers gang. The two would later fall out, and Kandola would be killed in 2002, a murder believed to be ordered by Cheema. In 1998, the United States charged Chima of attempting to smuggle heroin and hashish from Pakistan to California and exchange it with Colombian gangs for cocaine. He would not be extradited for another decade, as he filed numerous appeals. At a May 2000 wedding in Vancouver, attended by Chima and by then Premier Ujjal Dosanjh, Chima's bodyguard Mike Brar was killed. After investigating Chima following Brar's murder, Vancouver Sun reporter Kim Bolan found that he had not been arrested on a charge for assault in Burnaby. Chima was then arrested but released after the complainant died. In 2008, Chima was finally extradited to the United States, where he pleaded guilty. MP Sukhminder Sukh Singh Dhaliwal faced controversy after writing to a U.S. District Court judge on official House of Commons stationery in support of Chima. Chima was imprisoned in California until being released in 2012, when he returned to Vancouver and attempted to return to drug smuggling. He was killed on May 2, 2012, in a targeted drive-by shooting, just 3 months after being released from prison for the attempted sale of 200 kilograms of heroin. According to crime journalist Kim Bolan and her police sources, since returning from a California prison 3 months ago, longtime Vancouver gangster Ranjit Singh Chima had been trying to muscle his way back into the lucrative BC drug trade before he was gunned down Wednesday. In the process, Chima disrespected some of his former underlings who have moved up in the business since the 43-year-old went to jail. Some close to Chima, as well as police sources, believe recent disputes with old associates could have led to the gangland execution of the former South Slope crime boss in front of his parents' house on East 61st Avenue. He was trying to step into his old role, one friend said. He didn't realize that things have changed. He is survived by a wife and daughter.
If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.
You're watching the Everything Network.
The Brothers Keepers is an organized crime group based in British Columbia, Canada, that is engaged in organized crime across Canada and abroad. Originating in the Greater Vancouver area, the group has expanded across Canada since its founding and has established relationships with other transnational organized crime groups. The Brothers Keepers are believed by police in British Columbia to be among the most prominent and violent organized crime gangs in Western Canada. The gang is believed by authorities to traffic bulk quantities of cocaine, cannabis, MDMA, heroin, Percocet, oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, fentanyl, and methamphetamine, and they are suspected to engage in other criminal activities such as arms trafficking, murder, racketeering, extortion, loan sharking, assault, illegal gambling, armed robbery, among other crimes. Investigations also highlighted the gang's strategy to expand into new markets within the country and abroad, utilizing tactics such as reduced drug prices for street-level traffickers they supply, branded products such as purple fentanyl, and increased potency of drugs they supply. The Brothers Keepers were founded in 2016 by Gavinder Singh Grewal, with most of the gang's membership and leadership formerly made up of former Red Scorpions. Grewal was rumored to have taken the gang's name from a line uttered by Wesley Snipes' gangster character in the 1991 movie New Jack City. Brothers Keepers founder Gavinder Singh Grewal was found shot dead in his North Vancouver penthouse by his brother Mandeep on December 22, 2017. Police believe this murder was in retaliation for the murders of several Red Scorpion leaders in the months prior, such as Randeep Randy Kang of the Kang crime family, Konam Shirzad, and Ibrahim Amjad Ibrahim. The Grewal murder remains unsolved. However, police released surveillance footage and alleged that the suspects were a South Asian man, approximately 20 to 25 years old, and wearing a black jacket and a white shirt, and the other was described as South Asian, 25 to 30 years old, with a beard and wearing a toque and a dark jacket. Founding Brothers Keepers member Harpreet Singh Meju and Orosman Jr., Garcia Arevalo, who operated under the Kang faction of the gang, were hired to take out Iranian-born Turkish drug lord Setin Koç in Dubai. On May 4, 2016, Meju and Garcia Arevalo ambushed Koç as he was sitting in a vehicle in downtown Dubai. Koç was shot 9 times with 2 silenced pistols and was killed instantly. Meju and Garcia Arevalo then boarded a flight out of Dubai, departing before they were named suspects by the Dubai police force. Both men were murdered shortly after the assassination. On May 11, 2016, Garcia Arevalo was found dead in a blueberry field outside of Abbotsford. On June 10, 2016, Harpreet Singh Meju was found dead in a burned-out vehicle just outside of Agassiz, British Columbia. In 2019, drill rapper Lolo Lansky, Akina Nigbo, released a diss track titled Dead Man, in which he taunts the Brothers Keepers and the deceased Gavinder Grewal. One section of the song features excerpts from the 911 call made by Gavinder's brother after finding his body. Vancouver police launched an investigation to discover how Anigbo acquired the 911 recording. Anigbo is associated with the Kang crime family, a historic enemy of the Brothers Keepers. The Brothers Keepers are currently in conflict with the United Nations gang, as well as the coalition of the Red Scorpions gang and Kang crime family, which is also known as Bibo Gang, Blood In Blood Out Gang. 29-year-old Barinderjeet Justin B-Man Bangu, a well-known Brothers Keepers gangster with ties to the Wolfpack, was gunned down on March 13, 2017 in the parking lot of a Surrey Comfort Inn hotel. He is believed to be the first BK gangster targeted by a rival gang. Days earlier, on March 9th, leading Red Scorpions Deep Sangera, 32, and Harjit Singh Man, 49, were shot to death in East Vancouver in a hit authorities at the time speculated may have caused the killing of Barinderjeet 4 days later. Navdeep Sangera had been a member of Sangera crime family and was close with the Bacon brothers. On March 9, 2018, UN gangster Pardip P. Man Brar was found gunned down in Surrey in a hit believed by authorities to be retaliation for the killing of Barinderjeet B. Man Bangu. Matthew Navas Rivas was on the annual Brothers Keepers yacht cruise around the Vancouver waterfront just days before he was shot to death on July 25, 2018. He and his crew of Troy McKinnon and Cody Slay were Independent Soldiers members who, along with the rest of the Independent Soldiers gang and the Wolfpack Alliance, would become rivals with the Red Scorpions while aligning themselves with the Brothers Keepers gang. Troy McKinnon and Cody Slay were also found gunned down on January 15, 2018 and July 21, 2020, respectively. On January 20, 2021, Kang crime family Bibo Gang member and Red Scorpion Dylan Pistol P. Petrin was arrested for the murder of Independent Soldiers gangster Cody Slay. On October 18, 2018, Mandeep Grewal, brother of Brothers Keepers founder Gavinder Grewal, was shot dead in front of a bank in Abbotsford, Mandeep was not involved in the criminal lifestyle, according to police, and had no criminal record, according to the Vancouver Sun. He was considered an innocent victim in the gang war. 4 months later, a former associate of the Punjabi Mafia and their co-leader Manny Buttar and Bicky Kak was gunned down in Surrey. He was with friend and fellow Brothers Keepers gangster Harb Dhaliwal when the two were shot at in Richmond on December 21, 2018. On September 10, 2019, a high-profile Red Scorpion, who had been convicted of helping his gangmates and brother destroy evidence in the Surrey 6 case, was shot to death outside an Aldergrove fast food restaurant in Langley. His brother, Cody Havisher, was convicted in the Surrey 6 murders. Justin Lee Havisher, 33, was believed to have been blasted by two different shooters outside of a McDonald's on 264th Street and 56th Avenue about 8 p.m. Police who viewed the video of Justin Havisher's execution said it was disturbing and traumatizing, according to the Vancouver Sun. Red Scorpion's gang leader Jamie Bacon would blame the Brothers Keepers gang for his murder, according to a leaked audio file, as per Vancouver Sun. On January 19, 2020, at approximately 6:30 p.m., 28-year-old Julian Johnson was fatally shot at a Chevron gas station located at 4487 Canada Way in Burnaby, British Columbia. Johnson, known to police, was inside a white Toyota RAV4 when he was targeted by assailants in a black Nissan Rogue. Johnson's gang affiliation was not made public by police, but it was believed that he was a rival of the Brothers Keepers gang, and his murder was credited to the BK. On January 7, 2021, Anis Mohammed, a drug dealer associated with both the Brothers Keepers and Wolfpack Alliance, who had once been associated with the rival Dak crime group and notorious Dak group gangster Jujhar Singh Kunkun almost a decade before, was murdered in a shooting in Richmond. Police suspect that the shooting was retaliation for the murder of Kang crime family member Gary Kang the day before. On April 17, 2021, Brothers Keepers member Harpreet Harb Singh Dhaliwal was gunned down outside Cardero's restaurant on April 17, 2021. Harb Dhaliwal's brother Maninder and another man allegedly chased the assailant, stabbing him in the eye. The assailant, Francois Gauthier, was sentenced to life imprisonment in June 2022. Police at the time suspected that in retaliation for the Dhaliwal murder, high-level United Nations gangster Todd Gowenberg, age 46, was fatally shot 3 days later on April 20, 2021 at about 9 a.m. as he arrived to work out at the Langley Sportsplex in Langley. Brothers Jaskirt Singh Kalkat and Gurkirt Singh Kalkat were murdered only 9 days apart in May of 2021. Jaskirt was a prime suspect in the murder of United Nations gang member Carmen Singh Grewal at Vancouver International Airport on May 10, 2021. 2 days prior to the killing of Gurkirt Kalkat, a former affiliate of the Brothers Keepers who left with the Kang faction was gunned down in Nanaimo, British Columbia. Yasin Khan was a Kang crime family and Red Scorpion member and was believed to be targeted by the Brothers Keepers. The violence didn't stop there, as on February 8, 2022, Brothers Keepers member Juvraj Singh Jabal, aged 24, and a woman in the car with him, later identified as Jasmine Lindstrom, aged 20, were shot. Juvraj succumbed to his injuries on the February 10th while Jasmine survived. His murder was suspected retaliation for the killing of United Nations gang member Jimmy Slice Sandhu, who was shot at a villa in Phuket, Thailand days earlier. Almost 2 years later, in January of 2024, Jabal's alleged killer, Yusuf Kantos, aged 24, of Ontario, was arrested. Former Canadian Army Corporal Matthew Duper would be extradited to Thailand and convicted for the killing of Sandhu in 2024. Maninder Dhaliwal was shot dead alongside Satindera Gill, who was identified as Meninder's friend, who was not involved in the gangster lifestyle according to authorities. Both were ambushed and shot dead in Whistler in July of 2022. A week before the murder of Meninder Dhaliwal and his friend Satindara Gill on July 14th, the body of longtime UN gangster Christopher Irwin was found in Burnaby. He had been targeted twice in previous months, but survived both attempts on his life. Police believed he had been targeted by the Brothers Keepers gang. Meninder Dhaliwal was the second main suspect, along with Jaskirt Kalkat, as the men who murdered Karman Grewal, according to police sources. Meninder's alleged killers Gursimran Sahota and Tanvir Kak were apprehended by RCMP within a couple of hours. One of them, Gursimran Sahota, had close ties to Karman. Both Sahota and Tanvir Kak are alleged UN members. On September 12, 2022, Brothers Keepers member Sameh Ali Mohammed was gunned down in Brampton, Ontario. Police speculated that Mohammed's killing was retaliation for the murder of United Nations gang member Arman Singh Dhillon in Oakville the month prior. On April 6, 2023, Halton Regional Police Service announced 3 arrests in the murder of Arman Dhillon. 3 alleged Brothers Keepers affiliates, Karnveer Sandhu, age 29, of Edmonton, Joseph Richard Whitlock, age 30, of Pickering, and Kolveer Bhatia, age 25, of Calgary, were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. 2 longtime United Nations gangsters and brothers were gunned down 2 months apart in 2023. Chucky Samra would be the first to be killed in the early hours of Sunday, May 28, 2023, outside of a wedding he attended and was leaving at the time of the shooting. Robbie Samra was gunned down on Thursday, July 27, 2023, outside one of his Richmond homes. Police suspected the killers of both gangsters to belong to the Brothers Keepers gang, according to the Vancouver Sun. The high-profile killing of Harpreet Upal, better known as Harp, along with his 11-year-old son Gavin, who was an innocent bystander, in Edmonton in 2023, made national headlines in Canada and also outlined the national reach of the BC gang conflict, as the killing was suspected to be retaliation for the killing of United Nations gangster Parmveer Chahil in Toronto the day earlier. Edmonton police would confirm that Harp Upal was a high-level organized crime figure in Alberta, and that he was closely associated with the Brothers Keepers. In January 2024, Brothers Keepers affiliated rapper T-Sav, Tyrone Gwynn, was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of Kang crime family member Randy Kang and university student Jagveer Singh Malhi, whose death is suspected to be a case of mistaken identity. Shrek Dhaliwal, a leading figure in the Brothers Keepers and a well-known figure in Canada's organized crime landscape, was the target of an assassination attempt on September 21, 2024, in Langley, when assailants opened fire on Dhaliwal. He was alleged to have returned fire, resulting in the death of one of the attackers named Jonathan Hebrada Walters, age 38, who was from Edmonton and was known to police. Dhaliwal sustained injuries during the incident but survived. Authorities believe this event is linked to the ongoing gang conflicts in the region. According to National Police of Colombia, specifically the Directorate of Criminal Investigation and Interpol, alongside the RCMP of Canada, the Brothers Keepers Gang of Canada are believed to be one of the largest wholesale buyers of narcotics from the Clan del Golfo in Canada. The gang has established direct ties with Colombian cartel growers and traffickers, bypassing the Mexican cartel middlemen for pure cocaine. The Clan del Golfo is believed to be essentially one of the main suppliers of drugs and weapons for the gang, according to testimony by police in the Toby Muse book, Kilo, Life and Death, Inside the Secret World of the Cocaine Cartel. The Brothers Keepers are currently closely allied to the Independent Soldiers, another majority Punjabi Canadian organized crime gang, which originates from South Vancouver. The two gangs already had a close relationship due to their decades-long alliance in the Wolf Pack, prior to the Red Scorpions splitting into the Brothers Keepers, and then the remaining Red Scorpions splitting from the Wolf Pack. Both the Brothers Keepers and independent soldiers have been known to collaborate with one another in drug manufacturing and exporting drugs abroad, as well as in their rivalry with the United Nations gang. The gang also has an alliance with the Hells Angels, including its Hardside chapter, located in Surrey, as well as alliances with the West Point chapter and others. High-profile Brothers Keepers members Ty Quesnel, Harb Dhaliwal, and Barinder Dhaliwal attended the funeral of Hells Angels member Suminder Singh Ally Gruel after he was gunned down at a Starbucks drive-thru in South Surrey on August 2, 2019, a murder which the rival United Nations gang was believed to be responsible for. The Brothers Keepers are believed by authorities to have more of a personal friendship with the Hells Angels rather than a business relationship. Much of the alliance is built around personal relationships between some full-patch Hells Angels and some Brothers Keepers initiated members, often through friendships and sometimes family. Unlike the Hells Angels puppet clubs who pay tax to the Hells Angels and pay allegiance to the Hells Angels, the Brothers Keepers do not, despite being close with the biker clubs. The Brothers Keepers also have a close relationship with the Driftwood Crips, based in Toronto's Jane and Finch neighborhood. Several rappers associated with the Driftwood Crips have made references to the Brothers Keepers in various rap songs. According to the Vancouver Sun, the Driftwood Crips, who have been active in the drug and gun trade since the mid-1990s, have aligned with and are running drug lines for the Brothers Keepers, a BC outfit that is locked in a bloody Lower Mainland gang conflict with rivals from at least two other groups. In 2017, authorities in British Columbia carried out Project Treachery, which was a major police operation that targeted organized crime and exposed the use of rural properties as covert staging grounds for gang-related violence across British Columbia. Conducted jointly by the Vancouver Police Department, the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit, British Columbia, and other agencies, Project Treachery formed part of a broader initiative to combat escalating gang violence across the Lower Mainland from about the year 2000 to the year 2010. The operation focused primarily on violent organized crime groups involved in drug trafficking, firearms offenses, vehicle theft, and targeted killings. In November 2017, after extensive surveillance and intelligence gathering, police executed search warrants on several properties linked to gang activity. The most notable of these was a large rural farm property in Langley, British Columbia, located on 240th Street. While outwardly appearing to be a standard agricultural site, the farm served as a concealed hub for preparing targeted assassinations and facilitating organized criminal operations. When officers searched the property on November 13, 2017, they uncovered a substantial arsenal of weapons and equipment. The seizure included 9 handguns, 3 assault-style rifles, 2 explosive devices, over 600 rounds of ammunition, several sets of body armor, and 8 stolen vehicles, which bore fraudulent or altered license plates. In addition to the weapons cache, police discovered more than 500 marijuana plants, each plant wielding approximately a pound of cannabis per growth cycle, and related drug production equipment on the premises linked to cannabis trafficking. The scale and nature of the items found at the farm suggested that the property was being used not merely as a drug grow-op or storage facility, but as a staging area where individuals could prepare for killings. The combination of stolen vehicles, explosives, firearms, ammunition, and protective gear pointed to a sophisticated infrastructure designed to support assassins, providing them with the means to commit violent acts while evading detection. The discovery of explosive weapons in particular was seen as deeply concerning by law enforcement, as it indicated a potential for more extreme violence, than typically associated with lower mainland gang conflicts at the time. The Langley Farm bust was part of a larger coordinated effort, as Project Treachery aimed to disrupt multiple interconnected criminal groups involved in the region's ongoing gang wars. These included the Brothers Keepers gang and allied crime cells engaged in a violent struggle for dominance against rival organizations such as the Red Scorpions and their allies in the Kang crime family, Blood In Blood Out gang, as well as the United Nations gang and their allies in the remnants of the Dakdura crime groups. Project Treachery coincided with and complemented other major police initiatives like Project Territory, which was a successful investigation into the Blood In Blood Out gang and Red Scorpions gang drug trafficking organizations. These projects sought to dismantle the organizational capacity of these gangs, seize their assets, and stem the tide of gun violence that had increasingly placed the public at risk. In the aftermath of the seizure, British Columbia's Civil Forfeiture Office initiated legal proceedings to seize the Langley Farm property on the grounds that it was acquired and used in furtherance of criminal activity. The government's position was that the property and its assets had been instrumental in enabling crimes ranging from illegal firearms possession and drug production to conspiracy to commit murder. The civil suit alleged that the owners of the property had either knowingly facilitated or turned a blind eye to these activities. Rather than proceeding through a full civil trial, the matter was resolved through a negotiated settlement. The owners of the property agreed to pay $220,000 to the provincial government. In exchange, the government abandoned its claim to seize the land and the constructed homes and barns outright. The settlement concluded the civil forfeiture process while allowing the property owners to retain title to the farm. Project Treachery is considered a significant operation in the ongoing effort to disrupt organized crime in British Columbia. It provided evidence that criminal groups in the province had begun using rural properties as hidden operational hubs, allowing them to stockpile weapons, plan murders, and prepare for hits away from the surveillance and scrutiny of urban law enforcement. The case highlighted the adaptability of organized crime networks and underscored the need for continued vigilance and coordinated action among law enforcement agencies. The bust also demonstrated the utility of civil forfeiture as a tool for disrupting the infrastructure of organized crime, even in cases where criminal convictions are not secured against property owners. The RCMP's 18-month specialized federal serious and organized crime investigation into the Brothers Keepers gang concluded in February of 2024, with 8 Brothers Keepers gangsters being charged with various drug and firearms offenses, including the dismantling of a large-scale drug lab which had several kilograms of Percocet, oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, fentanyl, and methamphetamine ready for shipment. The probe uncovered a murder plot conspiracy by alleged high-level Brothers Keepers gangster Michael Manpreet, Michael Myers Johal, which was allegedly targeting rival UN gangster Gagandeep G-Man Sandhu, who ended up being killed. Johal would be charged with murder conspiracy for allegedly plotting to have Sandhu murdered. 3 other alleged Brothers Keepers gangsters, whom were accused of conspiring to murder 5 other rivals, were also arrested. 2 Abbotsford men, Anmol Sandhu and Navdeep Dhaliwal, both 26 years old, and a Surrey man, Gavinder Sekham, 34 years old. As part of the drug lab, a significant seizure included 356,000 pills, pill presses, and an industrial-sized drug lab in South Surrey, which could produce 60,000 pills an hour, meaning its operators were likely involved in exportation to Pacific Island nations, such as Australia and New Zealand, on top of production for the domestic market. Police also seized 4 illegal firearms, over 1,500 rounds of ammunition, and 168 kilograms of precursor chemicals containing fentanyl, benzodiazepines, methamphetamines, and carfentanil, highlighting the operation's scale and its conspiracy for international drug exportation into Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. Arrested for the drug lab were Brothers Keepers gangsters Michael Manpreet Johal, Richard Sen, Jagdeep Singh Cheema, Michael David Rast, and Kevin Mobes. Jagdeep Singh Cheema had once been an associate of Dak Group gangster Jujhar Singh Kunkun as well, and was a member of the Dak Dure Group, a group which is closely allied with the UN gang. However, Cheema had allegedly switched sides to the Brothers Keepers Wolfpack alliance years ago. In April 2024, drug kingpin and Brothers Keepers gangster Amandeep Aman Singh Kang, unrelated to the Kang crime family, was sentenced to 11 years in prison for controlling a drug empire which trafficked cocaine, MDMA, heroin, fentanyl, and methamphetamine in substantial amounts across British Columbia and Canada. When Kang and his alleged associates were arrested in 2021, police said they had seized multiple kilograms of drugs, as well as $50,000 in cash, multiple loaded firearms, and lab equipment used to manufacture MDMA and methamphetamine. Along with Aman Kang of Vancouver, others arrested as a part of this drug trafficking network were two men, Andrew Miguel Best, 21, of Vancouver Island, and Dylan Robert, age 22, of Surrey, as well as two female associates, Janat Bibi Nadeem, age 21, of Surrey, and Moshmem Kanun Khan, age 45, of Surrey.
You're watching the Everything Network.
The Bacon brothers, Jonathan, Jared, and Jamie Bacon, are a trio of gangsters from Abbotsford, British Columbia, who are suspected of multiple firearms and drug trafficking charges and implicated in a rash of homicides that took place in the Fraser Valley and Greater Vancouver area. The Bacon family originated from Edmonton. David Bacon was a special needs teacher who moved to Abbotsford after being hired by the Abbotsford School District, while his wife Susan worked as a property manager for the Prospera Credit Union. The Bacon family was comfortably middle class. The three Bacon brothers were Jonathan David, born January 31st, 1981, Jared Wayne, born March 14th, 1983, and James Kyle Jamie, born August 1st, 1985. Jonathan Bacon attended W.J. Muat Secondary School and excelled at wrestling. One woman who knew the Bacon brothers, who has asked to be identified only as Stephanie, suspected that Jonathan was working as a drug dealer, saying, "When you see a kid start to have money all of a sudden, you immediately figure it's drugs." Stephanie described Jonathan as a popular student who loved wrestling and who became colder as he became to associate with a group of older men, saying of his new friends, "They were older, some of them in their 20s. They all had cars and expensive stuff like jewelry and watches. When Jonathan started to hang out with them, he started acting like them, talking like them, dressing like them." Another woman who went to school with Jonathan, who asked to be identified only as Amy, stated that the Bacon family was considered to be mostly normal, but the two younger Bacon brothers were viewed as bad news. Amy described Jonathan as becoming more distant as he aged, saying, "It's not like he became mean and nasty or like a bully or anything. It's just that he became less friendly, more of a tough guy." Amy also stated that Jonathan's new friends, including the non-Asians, all had tattoos in Chinese writing. Members of the United Nations gang are required to have the phrase honor, loyalty, respect in Chinese characters tattooed on themselves. Jonathan graduated from Muat in 1999 and did not go to college. In 2000, he was arrested and convicted of drug possession, and again in 2001 for the possession of stolen goods. In 2001, David and Susan Bacon purchased an expensive house on Strathcona Court with 7 bedrooms that sparked much discussion in the community about how a teacher and a property manager could afford their new home. Jared and Jamie both attended Yale Secondary School. Jared took up wrestling in 2002 and in 2003 won the Provincial High School Wrestling Championship. Jamie followed his brothers in embracing wrestling, and in his final year of high school won a provincial gold medal in wrestling. One woman who knew Jared, who was asked to be identified only as Andrea, stated, "He was a tough guy, pushing his weight around. While Jonathan could be quite charming at times, Jared was more like a thug. My little brother and all his friends would avoid him at all costs." Andrea said of Jamie, "He was a jerk. I never liked him. At his age, lots of guys can be immature, but Jamie was like mean, like over the top, like he seemed to enjoy pissing other people off." Another woman known as Christine stated about Jared, "I couldn't believe it when I heard he was a teacher's son. He was disruptive in class and seemed not to care at all about his work." Christine said of Jamie, "He always had new fancy things, like clothes and jewelry, and he had a car when he was very young, a big car, an expensive one. I just assumed it was drugs." On May 15, 2001, Jamie was arrested for assault at the age of 15, an incident that is little known owing to a court ban. Journalist Jerry Langton wrote that the Bacon brothers were typical of the gangsters in the Lower Mainland, who usually came from middle-class families with loving parents. Langton wrote that Bacon brothers didn't come from poverty or in abusive or broken homes. In fact, they came from exactly the opposite upbringing that many social critics say incubates crime. The Bacon brothers lived in middle-class affluence in a nice house with their supportive parents. They went to good schools at which they excelled athletically and were popular socially. They were just some guys who thought they could get rich selling drugs. A man who asked only to be identified as Nelson, who moved from Toronto to Abbotsford, lived on Strathcona Court and knew the Bacon family. Nelson described the Bacon brothers as being in their 20s, but still living with their parents. Nelson said that the brothers made everyone in the neighborhood nervous, and that nobody wanted to run into them because they were obnoxious and rude. It started with the old man. He was not just rude, but aggressively so. I have no idea how he had a job as a teacher. Nelson called Jonathan the most relatively reasonable of the three Bacon brothers, while Jared tried to look like a gangster in dark suits and expensive sunglasses. He looked like he had more money than taste. Nelson called Jamie the worst of the three brothers, saying, "He was the size of a moose and seemed about half as smart." While the other two had macho swagger, Jamie looked like a psycho. Nelson stated that the Bacon brothers dominated the neighborhood doing whatever they pleased, like parking their expensive luxury cars, holding up traffic, and having loud parties well into the night. When Langton asked Nelson about the origins of their Bacon brothers' wealth, he stated, "They sold drugs, of course." The Royal Canadian Mounted Police believed the Bacon brothers were working with the United Nations gang, rather than for them. The brothers held in contempt Clayton Ruesch and what Langton called his juvenile faux Asian semi-religious rituals. In 2004, Jared was charged with attempted murder after a man was shot at the Fraser Valley Inn. The charges were dropped when the victim of the shooting refused to testify against him in court. In 2005, Jonathan moved out of his parents' house and rented a house on Winfield Drive with his girlfriend, Raylene Burton. Their neighbors described their residence as expensive-looking, automobiles constantly being parked in his driveway and on the street, as various tough-looking guys were always coming and going into the house. The police arrested and charged Jonathan with leading a break-in into a marijuana grow-op, but the unwillingness of the witnesses to testify against him led to Jonathan only being convicted of possession of stolen goods. Jonathan also started taking helicopter lessons from Dustin Princess Haugen, a helicopter pilot known to work as a drug smuggler for the United Nations gangs, flying drugs over the American border. In March 2005, Haugen was involved in a helicopter crash that killed his girlfriend, Christian Alexander. Haugen claimed that he was taking Alexander on a sightseeing trip at night. John ceased his helicopter lessons after the crash. The Abbotsford police put Jonathan Bacon under surveillance, and on the afternoon of August 4, 2005, Constable John Forster was informed by the surveillance team that he was sitting in the car of Godwin Cheng, a known drug dealer, in front of his house. Forster ordered the policemen present to arrest both men, and after arresting the two, the police found 8 ounces of marijuana, 15 ecstasy pills, 92 hits of methamphetamine, and $2,600 in cash in Cheng's car. Upon seeing Bacon's arrest, Burton fled from the house in her SUV, and after she was arrested only blocks away from Bacon's house, the police found $88,000 in cash inside her SUV. After being granted a search warrant, the Abbotsford police found in Bacon's house 4 handguns, 2 automatic and the other 2 semi-automatic. They also found a police scanner and a genuine police constable's uniform. It turns out Jonathan was dressing up as a policeman, apparently to assist with robbing other drug dealers. On October 25, 2005, Jamie Bacon, together with Dennis Karbovanek of the Red Scorpions, were arrested for uttering death threats and pointing weapons after becoming involved in a verbal altercation on Sandy Hill Road. On September 21, 2006, a drive-by shooting at Strathcona Court left Jonathan Bacon wounded in the driveway as he took multiple gunshots. As Jonathan recovered from the shooting, many of his duties fell upon Jamie, whom Langton called the monstrous, childish monosyllabic bodybuilder and wrestler. On December 7, 2006, at the Castle Fun Park in Abbotsford, Jamie was attending a meeting when a passerby happened to notice that one of the men attending the meeting was carrying a gun and called the police. Arrested alongside Jamie were Randy Naker and Barry Espadilla of the Independent Soldiers and Dennis Karbovanek and Anton Huytes Mersing of the Red Scorpions. In 2006, the Bacon brothers partnered with the Red Scorpions to help them compete with the United Nations gang. The authorities believe that the brothers took leadership control of the Red Scorpions shortly thereafter. It is believed that the Bacon brothers' takeover of the Red Scorpions was orchestrated by the Hells Angels to reduce the Red Scorpions down to a Hells Angels puppet gang. Clayton Ruesch, the boss of the United Nations gang, was dismissive of the Bacon brothers, saying, "To me, they were just little errand boys." Unlike Abbotsford, which has its own police force, Surrey hired out its policing to the RCMP. The Mountie detachment for Surrey was much smaller than the Abbotsford police force, and most of its members are not from British Columbia. There was perception in the lower mainland underworld in the early 21st century that Surrey was an easier place to operate in, as the RCMP detachment for Surrey is more transit, as most of its members rotate around various posts in Canada and hence lack local roots. On April 13, 2007, as Jamie Bacon was in the process of parking his car in the driveway of his house, his Corvette automobile was shot up by 2 gunmen who put bullets into the vehicle. Jamie jumped out of the car, pulled out a Glock handgun, and fired 4 shots at the would-be assassins who were now running away. Jamie was slightly wounded from the attack as he was wearing a bulletproof vest. As he was being driven to the hospital to treat the slight gash on his head, Jamie told Constable Byron Donovan of the RCMP, who was riding with him, that the shooting was part of the lifestyle. Jamie told Constable Donovan that he always wore a bulletproof vest whenever he went out as part of his lifestyle. Jamie also stated he was wearing a Level 3 bulletproof vest, which he stated were the best quality bulletproof vests, which he had learned. The Lower Mainland was gripped by a gang war in 2007 to 2009, as the Red Scorpions fought the United Nations gang, while the Hells Angels and their puppet gang, the Independent Soldiers, sought to play off both sides, supplying guns to both the rival gangs, which greatly increased the violence. Allied with the United Nations gang against the Red Scorpions was the Dakdura gang. The gang war increased the dependence of both the Red Scorpions and the United Nations gang on the Hells Angels, cementing their control of the Lower Mainland underworld. The police response to the gang war was greatly hindered by the perception that the police forces in the Lower Mainland were grossly inept, which people unwilling to come forward with information, which was the legacy of the Picton case. Picton was finally arrested in 2002, but the way that the police had ignored the evidence that Picton was a serial killer gave police forces in the Lower Mainland a reputation for being extremely incompetent and callous, which made ordinary people unwilling to risk their lives to come forward with information during the gang war. Throughout the gang war, the police forces in the Lower Mainland consistently appealed to the public for more information about the gangsters, as it was openly admitted that the police were operating in an information vacuum. In 2007, Edward Eddie Narong, one of the founding members of the Red Scorpions, broke away to found his own gang along with Corey Jason Lal. Corey Lal refused a demand from Jamie Bacon to pay him a $100,000 tax for the right to sell drugs in Surrey. Justice Kathleen Kerr stated in 2020 that Bacon wanted Lal killed because of his ego, saying he didn't want to look weak. In their world, Corey Lal had to die. Kerr stated that Jamie was the leader of a diabolical plot to have Lal killed. Jamie Bacon met with Corey at a McDonald's restaurant to threaten his life, warning he would be killed if he did not pay the tax he wanted. On October 19, 2007, the Surrey 6 massacre made the gang war in Vancouver front-page news. On that day, 6 people were shot dead inside Unit 1505 at the Balmoral Tower in Surrey. The dead included 4 gangsters, namely Edward Eddie Narong, age 22, Michael Justin Lal, age 26, his brother Corey Jason Lal, age 22, and Ryan Bartolomeo, age 19. The Lal brothers had been in a dispute about how much taxes they owed the Red Scorpions for the right to sell drugs in Surrey, and had broken away to found their own gang. The newly founded Lal gang had been exterminated in its entirety with the Surrey 6 massacre. 2 innocent bystanders, Chris Mohan, who lived across from Unit 1505, and a gas installation man, Edward Schellenberg, were also killed as inconvenient witnesses to the massacre. Jamie Bacon was not present at the massacre, but Justice Kerr stated he was the chief architect of the massacre. Kerr stated that Bacon was driven by his ego to order the slayings, saying, "In the twisted logic and perverse code of the criminal point of view, there is a zero-tolerance policy for displays of disrespect and defiance. Such conduct must be quickly deterred. Death is often the punishment meted out for such behavior." Staff Sergeant Derek Brassington of the Surrey RCMP was assigned to lead the investigation into the Surrey 6 massacre. Brassington was a career Mountie, married to a fellow Mountie who was known as a cop's cop. Brassington was assigned to the Surrey 6 case as reportedly the best detective in British Columbia. Evidence released after the convictions of the police detectives in charge of the Surrey 6 case in 2019 showed that instead of pursuing the killers behind the Surrey 6 massacre, the Mountie detectives in charge of the case spent a disproportionate amount of their time in drunken debauchery. The elite police team spent much of their time being intoxicated at various bars and strip clubs while making sexual advances on female witnesses, which nearly ruined the case against Jamie Bacon. 2 of the officers convicted claimed that their job stress made them incapable of rational thinking, and the riotous bacchanalian excess that the squad engaged in was a result of their stress-induced mindlessness. Brassington's superior, Inspector David Attu of the RCMP, tried very hard to seduce the girlfriend of one of the witnesses for the Crown, which nearly caused the man to break off his agreement to testify against Jamie Bacon. The detectives in charge of the Surrey 6 case all faced charges of fraud for billing the Crown for overtime pay, while they instead drinking in various bars and strip clubs. Langton wrote about the Surrey 6 massacre. The killers had more chutzpah and ego than they had any technical knowledge of how best to go about assassination. They left behind a huge mess of DNA and other evidence. But real investigations are not at all like the magic they show on TV and in movies. To build a compelling case from even the sloppiest murder scene takes lots of hours of hard work and no small amount of luck. The Fiji-born Eileen Mohan, the mother of Chris Mohan, became an eloquent spokeswoman for the cause of law and order, demanding that the police take action to bring the killers of her son to justice. By this point, the Bacon brothers had become major celebrities in the Lower Mainland, as the brothers courted attention by wearing expensive clothing, driving expensive cars, and always having their attractive girlfriends in tow. In the same way that Maurice Boucher became a folk hero in Montreal during the Quebec Biker War, the Bacon brothers became folk heroes in the Lower Mainland, being mobbed by adoring fans in their public outings. The Bacon brothers were widely idolized and admired throughout the Lower Mainland for their apparent ability to outwit both rival gangster and the Crown. Many young men in the Lower Mainland started to copy the short, cropped hairstyle favored by the Bacon brothers, who were seen as the zenith of cool. The American journalist Jesse Hyde wrote the media in the Lower Mainland loved the Bacon brothers, always obsessively following their latest move. Starting in February 2008, Eileen Mohan spoke at various rallies in Vancouver, demanding that the media stop glamorizing the Bacon brothers as noble folk heroes, and that the police start taking more of a proactive approach. In early 2008, Clayton Ruesch recruited 2 members of Calgary's fresh-off-the-boat killers gang, namely Billy Lai and Troy Tran, to come to the Lower Mainland to kill the Bacon brothers. On May 9, 2008, a young man named Jonathan Barber, who happened to vaguely resemble Jonathan Bacon because his hairstyle was the same as the Bacon brother hairstyle, was driving Jonathan Bacon's black Porsche Cayenne SUV down the Kingsway Highway from Abbotsford to Vancouver. Barber worked as the stereo equipment installer into automobiles, and he had been hired by Bacon to install a new audio system into his Cayenne. A car carrying a group of UN members, led by the professional wrestler Ion Croiteru and Barzan Tilly Choli, also going down the Kingsway, happened to see the Cayenne driven by Barber, and noticing from the distance that the driver looked like Jonathan Bacon, opened fire on the Cayenne, killing Jonathan Barber instantly. Tilly Choli became the leader of the United Nations gang after Clayton Ruesch was arrested in Texas on May 19, 2008. Tilly Choli, who became the most tenacious opponent of the Bacon brothers, was known for the human safaris, as he would spend hours cruising the Lower Mainland in his automobile looking for the Bacon brothers and other members of the Red Scorpions gang. On May 31, 2008, the police issued a statement warning anyone who was associating with Jonathan Bacon was putting their lives at risk. The charges against Jonathan Bacon, Godwin Cheng, and Raylene Burton for the possession of illegal weapons and drugs was dismissed when the judge ruled that the police lacked a warrant to search Cheng's car in 2005, and the arrest of Burton was also illegal because she only fled because of the arrests of Bacon and Cheng. On October 23, 2008, Dennis Karbovanec was stopped by the police, who found he was wearing a bulletproof vest and had a loaded handgun with a silencer in a hidden compartment in his Yukon Denali. The police also noted that Jonathan Bacon was driving right behind Karbovanec in his Mercedes-Benz when they pulled Karbovanec over. The police believed that Karbovanec was just a pawn negotiated with the Bacon brothers and worked out a deal where the Crown would drop all but one of the 11 weapons charges Karbovanec was facing in exchange for the brothers handing over Karbovanec's weapons cache. Jonathan Bacon handed over to Abbotsford Police Detective Lyle Simpson on behalf of Carbovanec 7 handguns, 2 shotguns, a hand grenade, an Uzi submachine gun, a rifle, and 114 sticks of dynamite. In return, the Crown dropped 10 of the 11 charges and released him on $15,000 bail. When the deal the Crown made with the Bacon brothers became public knowledge, it led a firestorm of criticism in the media and on social media, as the Crown was accused of being far too lenient with the gang. Adding to the criticism were photographs that the Bacon brothers posted on social media, showing themselves enjoying lavish vacations in Mexico. One of the leaders of the UN gang, Connor DeMonte, discussed plans in late 2008 to have a helicopter drop a bomb on the Bacon brothers' home. The plan that was abandoned, according to one of those involved, who later turned Crown's evidence as too difficult logistically. You never know how big the bomb could be. You could damage or kill the neighbors. Another means considered by DeMonte was buying a military rocket launcher to use it to pierce one of the brothers' armored vehicle. A plan that was also abandoned when it proved impossible to buy a contraband rocket launcher. In January of 2009, Tilly Choli was with Billy Lai of the Fresh Off the Boat Killers gang of Calgary, waiting outside of the GM place where a Lil Wayne concert was being held, hoping to kill the Bacon brothers who were attending the concert. Lai was overheard on videotape telling Tilly Choli to unload the whole thing, i.e. fire the entire round of his AK-47, if he saw the Bacon brothers. The police arrested both Tilly Choli and Lai before the attempt could be made. On January 16, 2009, the Abbotsford police answered a call that 3 men was seen carrying guns at the Seven Oaks shopping center. The 3 men turned out to be the Bacon brothers. No guns were found on them, though Jonathan was wearing a bulletproof vest. On January 20, 2009, at about 3:50 p.m., Jamie Bacon was driving in his Mercedes-Benz on the South Fraser Way and had stopped at a red light when a SUV pulled alongside him and a group of men opened fire. 6 bullets were pumped in Jamie's Mercedes-Benz, which led him to run the red light, and he drove manically down the South Fraser Way at high speed, being chased by his would-be assassins. Bacon ended up crashing his automobile into a keg restaurant after his car hit a median. After learning that Jonathan Bacon had moved into a condo at 651 Nootka Way in Port Moody on February 3, 2009, the Port Moody police warned in a public statement that to associate with any of the 3 Bacon brothers was to put one's life in danger. Langton wrote, "Not surprisingly, the Port Moody warning didn't work. If anything, it only made the gangsta wannabe kids in the Lower Mainland admire the Bacon brothers even more. The boys had proved they were not just untouchable by law enforcement, but also by their enemies. Their lives were like the twisted fantasies of a bored 12-year-old. The warning only put an official stamp on it." Later on the same day of the Port Moody warning, an associate of the brothers, Raphael Baldini, was gunned down in Surrey. People in the Lower Mainland flooded social media sites with praise and tributes for Baldini. On February 6, 2009, a Bacon brother associate, Kevin LeClaire, was shot in the front of the Marketplace IGA grocery and died the next day. On February 16, 2009, Nicole Marie Alamy, the wife of a UN gang member, Koshan Alamy, was gunned down in her car. As she was driving only with her 4-year-old son and the windows of her Cadillac CTS coupe were clear, it is believed that this was not a case of mistaken identity, but rather that her killers had targeted her intentionally as a way to bring grief to her husband. The murder of Alamy finally changed public opinion in the Lower Mainland, and people began to supply information about the underworld. For the first time, the police phone lines for tips was overwhelmed as thousands of people called in to supply potential information about the Alamy murder. Mountie Corporal Dale Carr told the media, "We're starting to see a bit of a groundswell, of people just saying, 'Enough is enough, we're fed up, we're going to give a call.'" Two of the callers identified themselves as longtime members of the Red Scorpions, who both stated that they were disgusted by the cold-blooded execution of a mother in front of her 4-year-old son, and the information they supplied proved to be very useful to the police. On February 22, 2009, an anti-gang rally was held in Surrey's Central City Plaza, where the lead speaker was Eileen Mohan, who demanded once again that the police take action to arrest those responsible for the Surrey 6 massacre. On January 19, 2009, the Police Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit was contacted by a man known as GL due to a court order who wanted to work as an informer, provided the Crown was willing to pay him for his services and information. The Crown was desperate for any information that might convict the Bacon brothers and agreed to GL's offer. GL had served a prison sentence in California for smuggling cocaine from Mexico, and upon his return to Canada contacted Wayne Scott, whose daughter Carly was the girlfriend of Jared Bacon and the mother of his child. GL's connections with organized crime circles in the United States and Mexico, together with him serving a prison sentence in California, made his offer to import $3 million worth of cocaine seemed credible to Wayne Scott. Through Wayne Scott, the informer GL first met Jared Bacon in February of 2009, where he spoke about importing 100 kilograms of cocaine from Mexico, which he would then sell to Bacon. Jared Bacon stated he had a financial backer in the form of very wealthy Indo-Canadian berry farmer who was willing to lend him $3 million in cash to pay for the cocaine. Wayne Scott and GL seemed to have a low opinion of Jared's backer, whom they always called a fucking Hindu. GL went to work for a diamond mine in northern British Columbia for the next 2 months, but stayed in contact with Bacon via his cell phone. On April 1st, 2009, Dennis Karbovanek of the Red Scorpions confessed to the police his role in the Surrey 6 massacre. On April 3, 2009, Karbovanek was arrested on charges of first-degree murder for his role in the Surrey 6 massacre on the basis of his confession. Karbovanek confessed to killing Ryan Bartolomeo, Michael Lai, and Christopher Mohan. Karbovanek, in an interview with journalist Kim Bolan of the Vancouver Sun, stated that hearing Eileen Mohan speak on television had persuaded him to come forward and confess. One of the neighbors of the Bacon family told Langton in an interview that the arrest of Jamie Bacon on April 3, 2009, at his parents' Strathcona courthouse, it was like a movie, a war movie. The cops looked like soldiers, all dressed in black with body armor and heavy weapons. Jamie did not resist arrest and was led into a police cruiser wearing his Red Scorpions hoodie and track pants. Rob Gordon, a criminologist at Simon Fraser University, was not impressed with the arrest, saying, "There is a colossal drug industry operating behind these kinds of individuals who, to my mind, are actually fairly low down on the pecking order." However, Langton argued that the arrest of Jamie was a turning point in the gang war as many Lower Mainland youth idolized the gangsters, especially the Bacon brothers. Until the Surrey 6 arrest, they appeared untouchable. Until that point, they were like the mythical gangsters of movies and popular music. They lived above the law, drove fancy cars, and had the prettiest girls. They made millions selling drugs, and they got away with murder. Langton wrote that the arrest of Jamie Bacon put a dent into their image. On April 4, 2009, Matthew Johnson, Cody Ray Havisher, and Jamie Bacon of the Red Scorpions were all charged with first-degree murder on the basis of Karbovanek's statement. In June 2009, it emerged that the delivery people of Canada Post had been refusing to deliver the mail on Strathcona Court since April 2009, out of the fear of their lives, saying it was too dangerous, much to vexation of the other people living on Strathcona Court, who complained that their mail was not being delivered. The delivery woman for Strathcona Court stated she saw Jamie Bacon being arrested on April 3, 2009, and was very traumatized by what she saw. Ken Mooney, the president of the Abbotsford Local of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, told the media, "This is the first time I have ever encountered this. Our employees are afraid to deliver there." Between June and December of 2009, Brassington had a torrid affair with the former girlfriend of Jamie Bacon, a woman known as Jane Doe 1, due to a court order, who agreed to testify for the Crown against Jamie Bacon. It was revealed after his guilty plea in 2019 that Brassington had billed the Crown for overtime pay while he was in fact drinking and having sex with Jane Doe 1 in various luxury hotels in Calgary, Montreal, Toronto, Victoria, Halifax, and Vancouver between June-December 2009. The police misconduct later almost ruined the case against Jamie Bacon, as his lawyers argued that much of testimony against him was perjury, as the detectives were sleeping with the witnesses against him. The statements from two of the detectives who sought to explain their heavy drinking on the job as due to being allegedly incapable of rational thought left the evidence gathered by the first investigation wide open to attack from Jamie Bacon's lawyers. As a result, the police were forced to essentially restart the entire investigation anew, costing the Crown thousands of dollars and wasting countless hours of police time. Upon GL's return to the Lower Mainland, he was contacted by Wayne Scott on May 2, 2009, about the cocaine deal, saying that Jared wanted a sample of the cocaine before committing the money. GL then signed a contract with the police to become an agent source informant, giving him immunity in exchange for a promise to testify at any trial. Jared was arrested in May 2009 on weapons charges, but released on bail. While wearing a wire, GL recorded Jared speaking frankly about his desire to import cocaine from Mexico, while GL tried to have Jared visit the warehouse that he rented in Vancouver. Jared was clearly unwilling to visit the warehouse despite GL's best efforts, out of fear of violating his bail conditions might send him to jail. Jared's backer seems to have abandoned the deal, as Jared was recorded demanding starting in the summer that GL provide him with the cocaine on credit, with a promise to pay him back later. At a meeting at the Scott household on August 2, 2009, Jared used an erasable marker board to write messages with GL, but he sometimes spoke instead. At another meeting at Scott's house on August 13, 2009, Jared spoke about the financing of the drug deal with GL, who, unknown to him, recorded it on the wire he was wearing. At one point, Jared complained about having to pay up front before the cocaine arrived, leading GL to speak about the financial details. Jared interrupted and told him, "We're not interested in how you do this, because the more you tell me, the more I get worried that this is a setup." In another conversation with GL, Wayne Scott complained that his daughter Carly wanted all of the commission to go to herself, instead of him. On August 26, 2009, GL phoned Scott to tell him that he had 72 kilograms of cocaine in his warehouse, and complained that Jared was being cheap in demanding that GL give him $300,000 worth of cocaine with a promise to pay later. In response, Scott told GL that Jared would have the money. Jared was driven by his parents to Scott's house, but the drug deal did not go through. GL was angry when he learned that Jared would pick up the cocaine at 10 p.m., leading him to say to Scott on his cell phone, "You know what 10 o'clock means to me? Pitch black and guns." Scott had to promise GL that Jared was not planning to rob him, despite his fears. Wayne Scott drove on past the warehouse when he saw cars that he felt might be police cars parked outside, while Jared turned out not to have the money as he had promised. Jared later claimed he had no intention of paying for the cocaine, but rather he was planning to steal it. The deal seemed to have collapsed after August 27, 2007, as GL had his last phone conversation with Wayne Scott that day, as it appeared that Jared believed that GL might be an informer, while it was apparent that Jared did not have the money that he promised to pay GL. On September 11, 2009, Jamie Bacon sued the Crown and Warden Debbie Hawbold of the Surrey Pretrial Services Centre, claiming that being held in solitary confinement was a form of torture. In the same lawsuit, Bacon also charged that cell 210 of the Surrey jail that he had lived in was full of blood, feces, and mucus, and his bed was a vinyl-covered foam mat. Bacon charged that cell 227 was a considerable improvement as it had a shower, a television, and a microwave, but he complained that mentally ill prisoners had damaged the latter too. In 2010, a court ruled in favor of Bacon and ordered the Crown to pay him damages. On November 26, 2009, Jared Bacon and Wayne Scott were arrested and charged with conspiracy to import cocaine based on what GL had recorded. Carly Scott was not charged. In a rare move, the Crown appealed the dismissal of the charges against Jonathan Bacon for the 2005 arrest, which Justice Donald Gardner had ruled was illegal because of the lack of a search warrant. The British Columbia Court of Appeal, in an even rarer move, upheld the Crown's appeal and restated the charges against Bacon, Cheng, and Burton. Jonathan Bacon, together with Larry Amaro of the Hells Angels, and James Riech and Randy Naker of the Independent Soldiers, formed a group called the Wolfpack Alliance in 2010. The police had their first inkling of the existence of the group when Jonathan was frequently seen cruising Burrard Inlet with Amaro on the latter's speedboat named Steroids and Silicone. Langton wrote that the Castle Fun Park meeting of 2006 was a recruiting meeting with the Independent Soldiers, acting, as they always did, as the Hells Angels proxy, luring the Bacon brothers away from the increasingly independent and unreliable UN to the more docile and malleable Red Scorpions. The senior partner in the Wolfpack was Amaro. The Hells Angels allowed their members to have side operations, provided that the rest of the chapter is informed and allowed a cut of the profit. Other members of the Wolfpack Alliance were the Alcalil family of Montreal and Ottawa, Johnny Raposo and Martino Caputo of Toronto, Shane Maloney of the Montreal's West End Gang, and Nick Nero, a drug smuggler from Niagara Falls. The journalists Peter Edwards and Luis Nahara wrote that the Wolfpack Alliance were a loosely allied and multi-ethnic group of mostly millennial-age gangsters who operated across the country. A gangster who turned against gangster lifestyle was Gurmit Singh Dak, the co-boss of the Dak Duri gang. The Dak Duri group was allied with the United Nations gang. After being shot and wounded in a restaurant, Dak contacted the Odd Squad, youth engagement unit of the RCMP, about making an anti-gang video for high school students. In a video made in June 2010, Dak stated, "The swaggering macho aggression of the gangsters hid a deep insecurity," as he stated that to live the life of a gangster was to live in fear, never knowing when someone would try to kill him, and never knowing who to trust. Dak stated, "If I could turn back time, I would never do it again. Every day, I've got to look over my shoulder. I've got to worry about my family. I've got to worry about, like, if I jump out of my car, am I going to get shot? Or, I could be walking in the mall and walking out and get shot. I don't know. Oh, I want to get out, but it's too late now to get out. I have too many enemies." On October 16, 2010, Dak's prescience about his imminent demise was proved correct when he was murdered with his corpse being found in his BMW in the parking lot of the Metrotown Mall in Burnaby. The cause of Dak's death was being shot in the face. Suvir Suk Dak, the younger brother of Gurmit, believed that the Wolfpack gang and that Amaro, Riach, and Jonathan Bacon in particular were the ones responsible for his brother's murder. Dak vowed to avenge his brother's murder. The police believe that the Wolfpack group was indeed responsible for the murder of Gurmit Dak, but have stated there was insufficient evidence to lay charges, given that the killer of Dak has never been identified. The younger Dak had hired a team of 4 hitmen to hunt down the Wolfpack, and stayed in touch with them via encrypted text messages on his cell phone. The hit team placed GPS tracking devices on the bottom of vehicles belonging to the Wolfpack as a way to track them down. On August 13, 2011, DEC received word via an encrypted text that GPS tracking showed that all the leaders of the Wolfpack were staying at the Delta Grand Hotel in Kelowna. In response, DOC sent out a hit team consisting of Jason McBride and Michael Jones from Vancouver to be joined by Jujar Kun and Manjinder Mani Heron, who traveled separately. DOC wanted to see the Wolfpack wiped out, sending texts to the four hitmen saying this was a chance to finally avenge his brother. McBride, who once had been given a gift of golden balls with Chinese characters worth $6,000 on them by Gurmit, was especially keen on avenging his friend. McBride had attended Gurmit's funeral in October 2010 and had been pressing Sook DOC for revenge ever since the funeral. On August 14, 2011, Jonathan was murdered outside the Delta Grand Hotel in Kelowna, BC. At about 2:45 p.m. on August 14, 2011, a white Porsche Cayenne carrying 6 people was leaving the parking lot of the Delta Grand Hotel when a group of 4 masked gunmen carrying AK-47 assault rifles opened fire. The gunmen fired at least 30 shots into the Cayenne, killing Jonathan Bacon, wounding Amero, and leaving a 21-year waitress, Leah Haddon-Watts, a quadriplegic as she took a bullet straight through her neck, severing her spinal cord. Lindsay Black, another woman in the Cayenne, took bullets through both her thighs. Jonathan Bacon took bullets to his left lung, stomach, spleen, left kidney, bowel, and bladder, causing him to be spasmodic as he fell out of the Cayenne, bleeding badly while having lost complete control of his bowels and bladder. Bacon died a few minutes later of massive blood loss despite the attempts to save his life via CPR. Larry Amero, a full-patch member of the Hells Angels, was also critically injured in the attack. Ryark was also in the Cayenne and fled from the scene, bleeding and in panic. Ryarch ended up going to the Philippines, under the grounds that Canada was too dangerous for him. The attack proved to be a major setback for Wolfpack, with one of its members killed, another in a hospital, and a third widely seen as a coward, as the parking lot security cameras showed Ryark fleeing from the Cayenne. After the attack, McBride sent an encrypted text to one of his associates, Amir Moonbat Ektasad. "Bro, there's going to be crazy heat and I'm going to chill at home till I get to Toronto on Friday." On January 17, 2012, Sandip Dippy Duri, the co-boss of the Dak Dura group, was shot dead while leaving a Vancouver hotel in a revenge attack for the Delta Grand Hotel incident. Niker was shot dead outside of a Starbucks cafe in Port Moody on June 25, 2012. On November 19, 2012, Suvir Sook DOC and his bodyguard Thomas Mantle were murdered. Manjinder Heron, one of the gunmen who killed Bacon, was killed on January 14, 2013 in Surrey. Dean Michael Wuchar was charged with killing Dura with the Crown, alleging he was a hitman for the Wolfpack. In 2018, Riach was convicted of drug trafficking in the Philippines and sentenced to life imprisonment. Jason McBride, Jujar Kun, and Michael Carey Hunter Jones were charged with the shooting. On May 1, 2018, McBride, in a plea bargain with the Crown, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for the Delta Grand Hotel attack, while Kun and Jones also made plea bargains, pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit murders. In their agreed statement of facts as part of their plea bargains, Kun, Jones, and McBride stated that Suvir DOC hired them to kill the Wolfpack as revenge for the murder of Gurmit DOC. Superintendent Pat Fogarty of the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit stated that the oldest Bacon's death and the incarceration of the other 2 brothers will create such turmoil among the leadership of the gang that the popularity and influence of the Red Scorpions will decrease within the British Columbia gang world. In November 2010, David and Susan Bacon put their house on Strathcona Court on the real estate market with a listed price of $579,000. Randy Dick, the realtor in charge of selling the property, advertised the house as the infamous Bacon House. Eileen Mohan stated about the real estate ad promoting the infamous Bacon House that it is almost like they are suggesting the Bacons are the celebrities of the day. I think it is very inappropriate. In December 2010, the Bacon family sold their house on Strathcona Court and moved to a new, unknown location. During his trial in 2011 to 2012 on the charges to import cocaine, Jared spoke frequently to the media, saying it was outrageous that the police had charged his girlfriend's father, Wayne Scott, alongside him, saying, "I feel bad for Wayne. He is a victim in this." Jared came across as an angry young man in his interviews as he demanded that various newspapers be shut down for printing what he called lies about himself and his family. Journalist Kim Bolan, the crime correspondent of the Vancouver Sun newspaper, wrote about Jared's demand that newspapers lose their licenses, that one does not need a license to operate a newspaper in Canada, which she used as evidence that Jared has a very poor understanding of how the media works. Bolan also wrote that Bacon doesn't seem to get that covering court cases is legal and legitimate, and that things said in court are covered by privilege, which extends to allegations against others not charged. Bolan wrote that James came across as arrogant on the stand as he openly admitted that he never abided by his bail conditions because he thought they were a joke. Bacon testified on the 10th of January 2012 that he never intended to abide by his bail conditions, saying, "I was in the hole for 41 days and I wanted to get out, so I lied." Jared admitted that he was a gangster, calling himself a professional street fighter, but vehemently denied media reports that his parents were involved in his gangster activities. As stated earlier, Jared testified at his trial that he was not going to buy the cocaine from GL, but he was just going to take it from him. The penalty for a conviction for conspiracy to commit theft is a lesser one compared to the penalty for a conviction for a conspiracy to traffic in narcotics. Jared's statements on the stand that neither Carly Scott nor Wayne Scott were aware of his robbery plans left both exposed to the claims of the prosecution that they were indeed attempting to broker a cocaine deal. Jared was furious when a wire recording of Wayne Scott telling GL that the parents of the Bacon brothers were involved in their son's activities was introduced as evidence. On October 18, 2011, a wiretape of a conversation that GL held with Wayne Scott on the 27th of August 2009 was played in court as evidence where Scott stated that both David and Susan Bacon were deeply involved in organized crime and were taking part in the meetings for the cocaine deal. The Crown attorney who prosecuted Jared at his trial in 2011 to 2012, Peter LaPrairie, stated to him on January 11, 2012, "I am going to suggest to you that both your father and your mother knew exactly what was going on because they were present the night before when you and Wayne sat at their dining room table and wrote out the instructions on the green board." As he usually did when it was suggested that his parents were involved in crime, Jared exploded in fury, shouting with much rage, "That is completely false. If they thought I was doing anything wrong, they would have pulled my bail and sent me back to jail. They were shocked and in tears when I got arrested for this." Bolan wrote that Jared's claims that he was a drug dealer were doubtful in her opinion, as she noted that Jared testified that he was planning to steal $3 million worth of cocaine from GL, but he claimed not to have any idea about what he was going to do with the cocaine once he had stolen it. Bolan wrote that in her view that Jared's testimony was damaging to himself, as he openly admitted that he had lied to get what he desired, bragged incessantly about the number of people he had beaten up, frequently exploded in rage on the stand, and arrogantly refused to answer questions from the Crown attorney, Peter LaPrairie, giving the impression of a man who felt that he was above the law. When LaPrere asked Bacon about a meeting he planned to have with someone named Gino, Bacon refused to say who Gino was, and instead took a sneering tone as he stated that Gino is a common European name. Jared Bacon testified that his drug addiction drove him to crime, saying that he was annoyed and desperate for money since he was a high school student owing to his heavy use of cocaine, oxy, and steroids. He was found guilty on February 2, 2012, of several charges relating to cocaine trafficking. Wayne Scott, who had no previous criminal convictions, was also convicted in the same trial. On May 4, 2012, Jared was sentenced to 12 years in prison for conspiracy to traffic cocaine with Justice Austin, Cullen ruling that the fact that Jared had never held a job, his long criminal history, and the circumstances of his life and experience to this point do not permit much optimism for his rehabilitation or inclination towards a law-abiding life. The sentence was then reduced to 7 years and 2 months after time served was taken into consideration. In September 2009, the Integrated Gang Task Force reported that 8 associates were murdered since the public warning by the police that those associated with John, Jared, and Jamie avoid the trio or be potentially killed by rival criminals. On April 3, 2009, Jamie was arrested by the RCMP Emergency Response Team for his involvement in the October 19, 2007 shootings of the Surrey Six, which included 2 innocent victims, Chris Mohan and Ed Schellenberg, at the Balmoral Tower high-rise building in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. Development occurred after an associate of the Bacon brothers, Dennis Karbovanek, pleaded guilty to his role in the shootings. While awaiting trial, Jamie and his co-accused were being held in isolation. BC Corrections Service said this measure was for their own protection because other rivals are also in custody, awaiting several trials. In what legal observers said was an unusual request, Jamie appealed to the Supreme Court of British Columbia to end his solitary confinement as a violation of his rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The court found that Jamie was subjected to cruel and unusual treatment while in custody, contrary to Section 12 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that he was subjected to such treatment for the purpose of furthering the police investigation. His conditions of confinement were also found to constitute a deprivation of liberty and security of person that was not in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice, contrary to Section 7 of the Charter. During the course of the hearing, the court learned that Jamie's privileged telephone calls with his counsel were unlawfully recorded. This matter remains before the court. Jamie was released into the general prison population, and the restrictions on his visits and telephone communications were removed. In May 2010, Jamie Bacon was convicted of all 11 charges related to the April 2007 discovery of a gun cache, but Jared was acquitted. The trial of Jamie Bacon in connection with the Surrey Six case was delayed when it was revealed that Staff Sergeant Derek Brassington of the Surrey RCMP, who led the investigation into the Surrey Six case, had an affair with a key witness for the Crown, a model and a former girlfriend of Jamie Bacon. The woman is only known as Jane Doe 1 due to a court order. Jane Doe 1 was willing to testify that Jamie Bacon, who was her boyfriend at the time of the Surrey Six massacre, was involved in the massacre, which caused her to receive death threats. The affair became public when Jane Doe 1 became pregnant with Brassington's child and became angry that Brassington refused to leave his wife for her. The lawyers for Bacon sought to have the case dismissed, alleging perjury by the woman in question. Brassington was charged with obstruction of justice for his initial attempts to deny the affair to internal affairs detectives, as were his superior, Inspector David Attu, together with Constable Paul Johnson and Constable Danny McCod, all of whom knew of the affair. The lawyers for Brassington claimed that his inappropriate relationship with a key witness was due to job stress, but that he did not counsel her to commit perjury against Bacon, as the defense lawyers were claiming. However, the judges excluded the Jane Doe 1 as a witness from the trial against Jamie, ruling that her relationship with Brassington meant there was a possibility of perjury, but refused to dismiss the charges as there was other evidence against Jamie besides for the statements of Jane Doe 1. Justice Kathleen Kerr, who was overseeing the case, ordered a stay in 2017 because of the police misconduct and undermined the integrity of the justice system to the degree that the judge could not permit the case to be tried. On December 1, 2017, Kerr ordered a stay on the proceedings against Bacon because the way that Brassington and the other detectives handled the case. Kerr stated she had serious concerns about the manner in which the police handled aspects of privileged and confidential information. The Crown appealed, and the appeals court ruled that the case could continue. In 2019, Brassington, David Attu, and Danny Michaud were all found guilty of various charges of misconduct for their handling of the Surrey 6 case. On January 19, 2019, the disgraced Brassington made a plea bargain with the Crown, where he made guilty pleas to charges of breach of trust and compromising the integrity and safety of a witness in exchange for a lesser sentence. At his sentencing, Brassington cried hysterically in the courtroom as he admitted that his affair with Jane Doe 1 had ruined his career, led to his marriage ending in divorce and the estrangement of his children, saying, "As a dad, I shouldn't have done this. As a father, I shouldn't have done this. As a cop, I shouldn't have done this." Brassington stated about Jane Doe that, "I treated her like a girlfriend. I didn't mean to fall in love with her." The journalist Rihanna Shunk, who attended the sentencing, described Brassington as a broken man, who between his sobs seemed to have much self-pity for himself as he sought to portray himself as a victim, claiming that the affair was caused by work-related stress. Brassington maintained amid his sobs and tears that his job stress was such that he had no choice but to engage in an affair with an attractive vicenarian model, despite his best intentions. The Crown dropped the charges against Johnson on March 5, 2019, because he was dying from Hodgkin's lymphoma. With Jane Doe 1 excluded as a witness, the Crown's case against Jamie Bacon was weak. On July 8, 2020, the Crown made a plea bargain where the first-degree murder charges against Bacon were dropped in exchange for him pleading guilty to counseling murder. Eileen Mohan called the plea bargain a sweetheart deal for Bacon, who received a relatively light sentence for ordering the Surrey 6 massacre. At Bacon's sentencing hearing on September 10, 2020, Justice Kathleen Kerr sentenced Bacon to 18 years. Mohan's appeals to Kerr to overturn the joint submission by the Crown and the Defense Counsel and impose a life sentence on Bacon were ignored. Kerr stated that the egregious misconduct of the Mounties investigating the case with Brassington sleeping with a key witness meant she could not impose a life sentence on Bacon. Kerr stated that because of the egregious misconduct of Brassington and the rest of the detectives, that 18 years in prison with credit for time served in jail was the most severe sentence she could impose on Jamie. Mohan was profoundly disappointed with his sentence, which she felt was far too lenient, saying, "Mr. Bacon gets to return home to his mother's arms. Today we celebrated his life, his rights, instead of celebrating Christopher. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but today is really, really difficult to accept. I want to respect the process, but I think the process is not respecting us in return." Jamie Bacon pleaded guilty to conspiracy for the Surrey 6 murders in September 2020, serving 5 years and 7 months after factoring nearly 12 years in pretrial detention. Jared Bacon, parole was revoked, returned to prison in September 2017, paroled in August 2020. Jonathan Bacon, the oldest of the trio, was murdered in Kelowna in 2011. In 2005, An attempted murder charge against Jared was stayed after the victim refused to testify at trial. In 2005, the police seized more than 700 marijuana plants and various pieces of pot-growing equipment and charged Jared and a friend with possession for the purpose of trafficking. Jamie pleaded guilty to robbery in 2007 in connection with a 2005 home invasion where a man was confined in his Abbotsford home and robbed of marijuana plants and growing operation equipment. He was sentenced to time served. Jared Bacon has frequently violated his parole conditions by being involved in a bar fight in 2017 and for substance abuse as he failed a cocaine test in 2018. On December 15, 2020, Jared's parole officer visited him and he stated that he could not answer the door because he was naked. However, a policeman went into the backyard and looked through the window. Veronique Boisson of the National Parole Board wrote in her judgment on March 17, 2021, that the policeman saw you through a window of the back of the apartment. He reported that you were fully dressed, that you were going quickly between two rooms, and that you retrieved a cell phone from under couch cushions. The policeman saw you sliding your finger across the screen of the phone numerous times and clicking after each swipe, suggesting that you were deleting information. You then passed the phone to your lady friend who hid it in her bra. Buisson noted that she found his behavior highly suspicious and believed that he may very well had returned to selling drugs, but she decided not to revoke his parole. Buisson wrote, "File information reveals that you are identified as a member of the Red Scorpions and the Bacon Brothers organization, which is very influential in Western Canada and has links with the Hells Angels, which are often described by the parole board as a notorious criminal organization." On April 23, 2022, an audio tape from Jamie Bacon was released to the media. On the tape, Jamie condemned the Wolfpack Alliance together with the Indo-Canadian Brothers Keepers gang in racist and homophobic language. Bacon attacked the Hells Angels, saying, "These guys are all goofies. They all play all sides of the game. Almost every biker is working with the police. Okay, I've seen it, bro. They think that they're gods, and they are little goofs that need to be locked up in the secure housing unit and die with their teeth and hair falling out." Langton wrote, "Although it may sound childish and comical, the word goof is considered perhaps the worst insult in the Canadian underworld," further noting that at least 2 murders in Kingston prison alone since the 80s were reported to be the result of someone calling someone else the G word. Bacon did not express remorse for his crimes, but declared his willingness to testify for the Crown as a way to be released from prison early. The Red Scorpions is a gang based in British Columbia, Canada. It was formed in 2003 by Quang Vinh Thang Le, known as Michael Lee, Tejinder Mali, Konam Shirzad, Matthew Johnston, and one other unnamed young offender. Michael Lee testified at the Surrey 6 trial that he and Shirzad formed the Red Scorpions after meeting in a youth detention center facility. Lee said the name Scorpions was a tribute to his older brother who was killed, and his nickname used to be Scorpion. The gang used the word red to symbolize blood, he said. Lee said Jamie Bacon and his brothers were not founders but joined the gang a few years later. The Red Scorpions have been running drug trafficking operations in the suburbs of Vancouver since 2005. Gang members can be identified by RS tattoos on their arms and necks. Any forms of skull tattoos usually indicates a member who has carried out a murder for the gang. The Red Scorpions come from various cultural and linguistic backgrounds, as they consider race secondary to loyalty and respect. The Red Scorpions have been involved in an increasing number of well-publicized incidents of gang violence in the Vancouver area, in part due to their bitter rivalry with the United Nations gang. The Red Scorpions' United Nations relationship worsened after the infamous Bacon brothers left the UN to join forces with the Red Scorpions. The two founding members were the Thai-Canadian Edward Eddie Susakon Narong and the Vietnamese-Canadian Quang Vinh Thang Michael Lay, both of whom lived in Coquitlam. Other important early members were Tejinder Mali and Konam Shirzad. The name Red Scorpions was chosen as the name for their gang in 2000. Both Narong and Lay were bullied as teenagers by a Korean-Canadian teenager, Richard Jung. In the summer of 2000, Lee and Narong led their gang into the High Max Karaoke Club in Coquitlam and beat Jung to death in the men's washroom. The two founding members were the Thai-Canadian Edward Eddie Susakon Narong and the Vietnamese-Canadian Quang Vinh Thang Michael Lay or Lee, both of whom lived in Coquitlam. Other important early members were Tejinder Mali and Konam Shirzad. The name Red Scorpions was chosen as the name for their gang in 2000. Both Narong and Eddie and Michael were bullied as teenagers by a Korean-Canadian teenager, Richard Jung. In the summer of 2000, Michael Lee and Eddie Narong led their gang into the High Max Karaoke Club in Coquitlam and beat Jung to death in the men's washroom. Both Narong and Lay were charged with second-degree murder, but in 2002, in a plea bargain with the Crown, both pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Both were sentenced to 18 months in the Willingdon Youth Detention Center. During their time at Willingdon, Lee and Narong reinvented the Red Scorpions gang from the more loosely structured and informal gang they had founded in 2000. Lee and Narong declared that members of the Red Scorpions would always have tattoos on their wrists and/or necks to identify them as gang members. The Red Scorpions borrowed much from the United Nations gang and from outlaw biker clubs, as the gang was envisioned as multi-ethnic. All members were required to know martial arts. The gang uses sham versions of Eastern philosophies as a sort of ideology. And finally, the structure of the gang was modeled after outlaw biker clubs. A key member of the gang was Anton Huitis Mersing, who was born in Calgary in 1971 to a Canadian father and an Australian mother. Huitis Mersing grew up in Australia and then in Los Angeles. The parents of Huitis Mersing divorced, and when he was 11, his mother abandoned him as he came from school one day to find a note saying that she wanted to live her own life and that he was now on his own. Huitis Mersing grew up in Compton, and he ended up joining a Hispanic gang. His youth consisted of what he called a decade of gladiator school in the Los Angeles County jail system, which for anybody that is white is a total nightmare. On December 7, 2001, Huitis Mersing was deported to Canada after his release from an American prison, a nation that he barely knew. Huitis Mersing settled in New Westminster and joined the Red Scorpions. His connections with various gangs in the Los Angeles area proved to be a major factor in the growth of the Red Scorpions, as there was a huge demand in Los Angeles for the BC Bud strain of marijuana, considered to be the best strain of marijuana in the world, while there was much demand for cocaine and guns in the Vancouver area. Huitis Mersing started to engage in gun running and smuggling cocaine for the Red Scorpions while having BC Bud marijuana smuggled into the United States. By 2005, the Red Scorpions had become a major gang in the Lower Mainland. The gang primarily sold cocaine, heroin, and ecstasy via the so-called dial-a-dope lines. The dominant organized crime in the Lower Mainland are the Hells Angels. In the 2000s, the Hells Angels reduced other gangs in the Lower Mainland down to puppet gangs. The Independent Soldiers Gang by 2005 became a puppet gang for the Hells Angels, while the United Nations Gang were likewise been reduced down to a subordinate status to the Hells Angels. By 2006, the Red Scorpions were the only major Lower Mainland gang that was not under Hells Angels' control. On December, Robert William Pickton, also known as the Pig Farmer Killer or the Butcher, was a Canadian serial killer and pig farmer. After dropping out of school, he left a butcher's apprenticeship to begin working full-time at his family's pig farm and inherited it in the early 1990s. Between 1995 and 2001, Picton is believed to have murdered at least 26 women, many of them prostitutes from Vancouver's downtown east side. Robert Picton was born on October 24, 1949, to a family of pig farmers in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, 17 miles east of Vancouver. His older sister, Linda Louise Wright, was sent off to live with relatives in Vancouver, as their parents thought that the family pig farm would be an inappropriate setting to raise a young girl. Robert and his younger brother, David Francis Picton, began working at the farm at an early age, and their mother was very demanding, prioritizing the pigs over the brothers' personal hygiene and forcing them to work long hours raising the farm's livestock. Louise often sent the brothers to school in unwashed, dirty clothes, reeking of manure and earning them the nickname Stinky Piggy from their classmates. Robert was strongly attached to her and rarely interacted with his abusive father. He struggled in school, being put in a special class after failing grade 2. At the age of 12, he began raising a calf, which became his beloved pet. 2 weeks later, after not finding it after school, he was told to check the barn and was distraught to find it slaughtered. Robert dropped out of school in 1963 and began working as a meat cutter. He continued to do so for nearly 7 years before leaving to work full-time at the farm. In 1978 and 1979, the parents died and the siblings inherited the pig farm, selling parts for $5 million. Worker Bill Hiscox called the farm a creepy-looking place, patrolled by a 612-pound boar, and described Picton as a pretty quiet guy, hard to strike up a conversation with, whose occasional bizarre behavior, despite no evidence of substance abuse, would draw attention. Picton became wealthy by selling parts of his farmland to property developers as the economy of the Lower Mainland grew exponentially in the 1980s to the 1990s. He often hosted parties at an ad hoc nightclub called Piggy's Palace, which attracted the political and economic elites of the Lower Mainland, along with the Hells Angels. Starting in the 1990s, women living in the Lower Mainland, most notably on the impoverished downtown east side of Vancouver, had started to go missing, leading to speculation in the media that a serial killer was operating. The majority of the missing women were Indigenous women, women with substance use disorders, and sex workers. On March 23, 1997, Picton was charged with the attempted murder of sex worker Wendy Lynn Eistetter, whom he had stabbed 4 times during an altercation at the farm. She told police he had handcuffed her, and that she had escaped after suffering several lacerations. She told them she had disarmed him and stabbed him with his weapon. He sought treatment at Eagle Ridge Hospital, while Eistetter recovered at the nearest emergency room. Picton was released on a $2,000 bond, and the attempted murder charge against him was dropped on January 27, 1998, because Eistetter had drug addiction issues, and prosecutors believed her too unstable for her testimony to help secure a conviction. David Picton was convicted of sexual assault in 1992, being fined $1,000 and given 30 days probation. In that case, the victim told police that David had attacked her in his trailer at the pig farm, but she managed to escape. Robert had also been sued 3 times for traffic offenses in 1988 and 1991, settling all 3 claims out of court. The Picton brothers were eventually sued by Port Coquitlam officials for violating zoning ordinances, neglecting the agriculture for which it had been zoned, and having altered a large farm building on the land for the purpose of holding dances, concerts, and other recreations. They had begun to neglect the site's farming operations and registered a non-profit charity, the Piggy Palace Good Time Society, with the Canadian government in 1996, claiming to organize, coordinate, manage, and operate special events, functions, dances, shows, and exhibitions on behalf of service organizations, sports organizations, and other worthy groups. Its events included raves and wild parties featuring Vancouver sex workers, and gatherings in a converted slaughterhouse on the farm at 953 Dominion Avenue in Port Coquitlam. These events attracted as many as 2,000 people, and members of the Hells Angels were known to be in attendance. Subsequently, the Pickton brothers ignored growing legal pressure and held a 1998 New Year's Eve party, after which they were faced with an injunction banning future parties. The police were authorized to arrest and remove any person attending future events at the farm. The society's nonprofit status was removed the following year for inability to produce financial statements. It was subsequently disbanded. An employee of Pickton found several purses belonging to the missing women from the downtown east side and reported Pickton to the police. The police conducted 3 searches of the farm, but found no evidence. In June of 1999, the police received a tip that Robert Pickton had a freezer full of human flesh in his farmhouse, which the police ignored. On February 6, 2002, police executed a search warrant for illegal firearms at the Pickton property. Both Pickton brothers were arrested, and police obtained a second warrant using what they had seen on the property to search the farm as part of the BC Missing Women investigation. Personal items belonging to missing women were found at the farm, which was sealed off by members of the joint RCMP, Vancouver Police Department Task Force. The following day, Pickton was charged with weapons offenses. Both Picktons were later released, and Robert was kept under police surveillance. On February 22, 2002, Robert Pickton was arrested again and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Serena Abotsway and Mona Wilson. On April 2nd, 3 more charges were added for the murders of Jacqueline McDonnell, Diane Rock, and Heather Bottomley. A 6th for the murder of Andrea Joesbury was laid on April 9th, followed shortly by a 7th for Brenda Wolfe. On September 20th, 4 more were added for Georgina Papin, Patricia Johnson, Helen Hallmark, and Jennifer Firminger. Another 4 for Heather Chinnock, Tanya Holick, Sherry Irving, and Inga Hall were laid on October 3rd. On May 26, 2005, 12 more came for Kara Ellis, Andrea Borhaven, Deborah Lynn Jones, Marnie Fry, Tiffany Drew, Carrie Koski, Sarah DeVries, Cynthia Phillips, Angela Jardine, Wendy Crawford, Diana Melnick, and Jane Doe, bringing the total to 27. Excavations continued at the farm through November 2003. The cost of the investigation was estimated to have been $70 million by the end of 2003, according to the provincial government. The property was fenced off under lien by the Crown in right of British Columbia and remains so as of 2023. In the meantime, all the buildings on the property, except a small barn, had been demolished. Forensic analysis proved difficult because the bodies may have been left to decompose or be eaten by insects and pigs on the farm. During the early days of the excavations, forensic anthropologists brought in heavy equipment, including 2 50-foot, 15-meter, flat conveyor belts and soil sifters to find traces of human remains. On March 10, 2004, the government revealed that Robert Pickton may have ground up human flesh and mixed it with pork that he sold to the public. The province's health authority later issued a warning. Another claim was made that he fed the bodies directly to his pigs. In 2003, a preliminary hearing was held, and the clothes and rubber boots that Pickton had been wearing during the Eisteddar assault were seized by police from an RCMP storage locker. In 2004, lab testing showed that the DNA of 2 women, Borhaven and Ellis, were on the items. The trial began on January 30, 2006, in New Westminster. He pleaded not guilty to the 27 charges of first-degree murder in the Supreme Court of British Columbia. The voir dire phase of the trial took most of the year to determine what evidence might be admitted before the jury. Reporters were not allowed to disclose any of the material presented in the arguments. On March 17th, one of the counts was rejected by Justice James Williams for lack of evidence. 5 months later, Justice Williams severed the charges, splitting them into one group of 6 counts and another of 20. The trial proceeded on the group of 6 counts. The remaining 20 were stayed on August 4, 2010. Because of the publication ban, full details of the decision were not made publicly available, but Justice Williams explained that trying all 26 charges at once would put an unreasonable burden on the jury, as the trial could have lasted up to 2 years. It would also have increased the possibility of mistrial. The initial date for the jury trial on the first 6 counts was January 8, 2007, but it was postponed to January 22nd. On that date, Pickton faced first-degree murder charges in the deaths of Fry, Abotsway, Papin, Josbury, Wolfe, and Wilson. The media ban was eventually lifted, and the details of what was found during the investigation were publicly released. During Pickton's trial, lab staff testified that about 80 unidentified DNA profiles, roughly half male and half female, have been detected on evidence. A loaded .22 revolver with a dildo over the barrel and 1 round fired, boxes of .357 Magnum handgun ammunition, night vision goggles, 2 pairs of faux fur-lined handcuffs, a syringe with blue liquid inside, and Spanish fly aphrodisiac were found inside Pickton's trailer. In a videotaped recording played for the jury, Robert Pickton claimed to have attached the dildo to his weapon as a makeshift silencer. This explanation was impractical at best, as revolvers are near impossible to silence in this manner. A videotape of Pickton's friend Scott Chubb saying Pickton had told him a good way to kill a female heroin addict was to inject her with windshield washer fluid. A second tape was played for Pickton, in which an associate named Andrew Bellwood said Pickton mentioned killing sex workers by handcuffing and strangling them, then bleeding and gutting them before feeding them to pigs. Photos of the contents of a garbage can found in Pickton's slaughterhouse, which held some remains of victim Mona Wilson. On December 9, 2007, the jury found Pickton not guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder, but he was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. On December 11, 2007, after reading 18 victim impact statements, British Columbia Supreme Court Judge Justice James Williams sentenced Pickton to life with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum punishment for second-degree murder, and equal to the sentence which would have been imposed for a first-degree murder conviction, stating, "Mr. Pickton's conduct was murderous and repeatedly so. I cannot know the details, but I know this. What happened to them was senseless and despicable." After Pickton was arrested, witness Lynn Ellingson came forward to authorities claiming to have seen Pickton skinning a woman hanging from a meat hook years earlier, and claimed she had not told anyone about it out of fear of losing her life. However, Ellingson admitted she had blackmailed Pickton about the incident on more than one occasion. The victim's children filed a civil lawsuit in May of 2013 against the Vancouver Police Department, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Crown for failing to protect the victims. They reached a settlement in March 2014, and each child was compensated $50,000 without admission of liability. On January 7, 2008, the Attorney General filed an appeal in the British Columbia Court of Appeal against Pickton's acquittals on the first-degree murder charges. The grounds of appeal related to a number of evidentiary rulings made by the trial judge, certain aspects of the trial judge's jury instructions, and the ruling to sever the 6 charges Pickton was tried on from the remaining 20. Although Pickton had been acquitted on the first-degree murder charges, he was convicted of second-degree murder and received the same sentence as he would have on first-degree murder convictions. The relatives of the victims expressed concern that the convictions would be jeopardized if the Crown argued that the trial judge had made errors. Opposition critic Leonard Krog criticized the Attorney General for not having briefed the victims' families in advance. Wally Opal apologized to the victims' families for not informing them of the appeal before it was announced to the general public. Opal also said that the appeal was filed largely for strategic reasons, in anticipation of an appeal by the defense. Under the applicable rules of court, the time period for the Crown to appeal expired 30 days after December 9th, when the verdicts were rendered, while the time period for the defense to appeal expired 30 days after December 11th, when Pickton was sentenced. On January 9, 2008, lawyers for Robert Pickton filed a notice of appeal in the British Columbia Court of Appeals, seeking a new trial on 6 counts of second-degree murder. The notice of appeal enumerated various areas in which the defense alleged that the trial judge erred: the main charge to the jury, the response to the jurors' questions, amending the jury charge, similar fact evidence, and Pickton's statements to the police. The British Columbia Court of Appeals issued its decisions on June 25, 2009, including some banned from publication. It dismissed the defense appeal by a 2-to-1 majority. Due to a dissent on a point of law, Pickton was entitled to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada without first seeking leave to appeal. His notice of appeal was filed in the Supreme Court of Canada on August 24, 2009. The Court of Appeal allowed the Crown appeal, finding that the trial judge erred in excluding some evidence and in severing 6 counts from the rest. The order resulting from this severance was stayed, so that the conviction on the 6 counts of second-degree murder was not set aside. On June 26, 2009, Pickton's lawyers confirmed that they would exercise his right to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. The appeal was based on the dissent in the British Columbia Court of Appeals. While Pickton had an automatic right to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada based on the legal issues on which Justice Donald had dissented, Pickton's lawyers applied to the Supreme Court of Canada for leave to appeal on other issues as well. On November 26, 2009, the Supreme Court of Canada granted this application for leave to appeal. The effect of this was to broaden the scope of Pickton's appeal, allowing him to raise arguments that had been rejected unanimously in the British Columbia Court of Appeal. On July 30, 2010, the Supreme Court of Canada rendered its decision dismissing Pickton's appeal and affirming his convictions. The argument that Pickton should be granted a new trial was unanimously rejected by the justices of the Supreme Court of Canada. Although unanimous in its result, the Supreme Court split 6 to its legal analysis of the case. The issue was whether the trial judge made a legal error in his instructions to the jury, and in particular, in his re-instruction, responding to the jury's question about Pickton's liability if he was not the only person involved. Writing for the majority, Madam Justice Charon found that the trial judge's response to the question posed by the jury did not adversely impact on the fairness of the trial. She further found that the trial judge's overall instructions with respect to other suspects compendiously captured the alternative routes to liability that were realistically an issue in this trial. The jury was also correctly instructed that it could convict Mr. Pickton if the Crown proved this level of participation, coupled with the requisite intent. Justice Louis Lebel, writing for the minority, jury was not properly informed of the legal principles which would have allowed them as triers of fact to consider evidence of Robert's aid and encouragement to an unknown shooter as an alternative means of imposing liability for the murders. British Columbia Crown spokesman Neil Mackenzie announced that prosecution of the 20 other murder charges would likely be discontinued. In reaching this position, the branch has taken into account the fact that any additional convictions could not result in any increase to the sentence that Mr. Pickton has already received. Families of the victims had varied reactions to this announcement. Some were disappointed that Pickton would never be convicted of the 20 other murders, while others were relieved that the gruesome details of the murders would not be aired in court. In 2010, the Vancouver Police Department issued a statement that an exhaustive management review of the missing women investigation had been conducted, and the Vancouver Police Department would make the review available to the public once the criminal matters are concluded and the publication bans are removed. In addition, the Vancouver Police Department disclosed that for several years it has communicated privately to the provincial government that it believed a public inquiry would be necessary for an impartial examination of why it took so long for Robert Pickton to be arrested. In August 2010, the publication ban imposed during Pickton's trial in 2006 was lifted. The journalist Jerry Langton wrote, "The now public details of the investigation and trial appalled many. The unwillingness of the police to pursue Pickton, despite overwhelming evidence, smacked hard of racism, sexism, and bias against drug addicts and sex workers. Many felt that the police treated crimes against Aboriginals, drug addicts, sex workers, and, in particular, women, as less important than they should have. The Pickton case seriously damaged the image of the police forces of the Lower Mainland." At a press conference, Deputy Chief Constable Doug Lepard of the Vancouver Police Department apologized to the victims' families. "I wish from the bottom of my heart that we would have caught him sooner. I wish that the several agencies involved, that we could have done better in so many ways. I wish that all the mistakes that were made, we could undo. And I wish that more lives would have been saved. So on my behalf and behalf of the Vancouver Police Department, and all the men and women that worked on this investigation, I would say to the families how sorry we all are for your losses." After Pickton lost his final appeal at the Supreme Court of Canada, the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, chaired by Wally Oppel, was called to examine the role of the Vancouver Police and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the disappearances and murders of women in the downtown East Side. Families of the missing and murdered women have been calling for public hearings since before Pickton was arrested and eventually convicted of 6 murders. The Commission's final report submission to the Attorney General was dated November 19, 2012, and was released to the public on December 17th. During the inquiry, lawyers for some of the victims' families sought to have an unpublished 289-page manuscript authored by former police investigator Lorimer Shenher entered as evidence and made entirely public. Several passages were read into the inquiry's record, but Commissioner Oppel declined to publicize the entire manuscript. As an extension of the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was formed by the Government of Canada in September of 2016. During a court hearing on August 4, 2010, Judge Williams stated that Robert Pickton should be committed to a federal penitentiary. Up to that point, he had been held at a provincial pretrial institution. In June 2018, he was transferred from Kent Institution in British Columbia to Port Cartier Institution in Quebec. In February 2024, Pickton became eligible to apply for day parole, but no Parole Board of Canada hearing was scheduled. On May 19, 2024, Robert Pickton was attacked by another prisoner at the Port Cartier Institution in Quebec. The prisoner, Martin Charest, described as having a history of assaulting other prisoners, took a broomstick, broke the handle, and shoved it into Pickton's face. Correctional officers intervened, handcuffed Charest, and took him to the Structured Intervention Unit. Pickton was airlifted to a hospital and put on life support. He died at a hospital in Quebec City from complications of the attack on May 1, 2024. In July 2025, Martin Charest was charged with first-degree murder